Welcome to another Red Hour segment hosted by the Midwestern Marx Institute for Marxist Theory and Political Analysis. Today, we're going to be discussing the UPS strike, the upcoming UPS strike, hopefully in August, Daniel Ellsberg's recent passing at the age of 92. We'll talk a little bit about the speech that the General Secretary Pambis Kyritsis from the World Federation of Trade Unions gave today. And we'll also talk about Putin's announcement to African leaders that the peace treaty from spring 2022 was broken by Ukraine and Boris Johnson after Boris Johnson's visit. And we'll also talk about a few other things as well as engage with the audience. So without further ado, we'll get started right after this.
All right, what's up, everybody? Real quick, just getting off the bat. Everybody knows your boys get shadow banned and throttled all the time. Please hit like, subscribe, click the little bell, whatever it is. It genuinely does help us overcome algorithmic suppression. If you really want to support us, if you can, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/MidwesternMarx. Even, a tiny bit helps if that's all you got. Otherwise, yeah, whatever. Anyway, how's everybody doing tonight?
We're doing really good. I'm very happy that Eddie's back. Oh, I'm happy to see Eddie back from his hiatus.
For sure. I
brought my computer.
I brought my computer this week, but I just been way too busy. So super pumped to be with you guys from beautiful Idaho here. And we're getting pretty high tech at this point. At the Airbnb I'm at, there's an electric standing desk. So Midwestern Marx is blasting to the future right now in terms of technology. So happy to be with you boys.
And it all comes at the same time as we just upgraded the StreamYard to stream in 1080. And we've also upgraded a few things. We know we've been collecting for a fund for a new camera and microphone for myself. And here we go. So we listen to the people and we take their hard-earned money and we invest it in the People's Institute, which is the Midwestern Marx Institute.
Absolutely.
I do want to say I apologize about the 1080p and this ugly mug, but what are you going to do?
That was a big factor, in keeping us at a bad quality. At least it hid some of the not very pleasing features.
Now you get to see how ugly I am right up close.
Right. As soon as we went to 4K, I noticed like pimples on my head and stuff. Like, I don't know about all this, but speaking of the people's hard-earned money, shout out to the Davey. Thank you, the Davey. Very consistent supporter of our show. One of the reasons that Carlos has a nice glowing microphone right now. Without Midwestern Marx, I would still be listening to mainstream media tell me about the Uyghur genocide in China. We must recognize and challenge imperialism in the moment, not just in hindsight. Absolutely. Thanks for all you guys do. Thank you, the Davey. Appreciate your support and appreciate you saying that, because really that was the first issue where I really split with like TikTok liberals. We were, I'm trying be friendly towards anyone until they give me a reason not to, right? And there was a lot of overlap, especially during the Trump administration, with me and a lot of the other liberals. And then some of the people who I considered my friends, accounts that had maybe 500,000 followers, were getting money or getting pressure from outside sources to push this Uyghur narrative. So I, at that moment, had to make a decision, do I back away from this because my friends are promoting it, or do I call it out? And I chose to call it out. And that was definitely a turning point for Midwestern Marx away from liberalism and towards anti-imperialism in practice, not just in words, because it's easy to call yourself an anti-imperialist and then do what I always say, be an anti-imperialist in hindsight. 20 years from now, there's going to be all these leaked documents about Nazis in Ukraine and secret money to Ukraine and U.S. special forces and meddling in Ukraine. And a whole bunch of people who are cheering on the proxy war right now are going to come out against it. But they'll say, oh, how could we have known back then? Everybody likes to be an anti-imperialist in hindsight because it's easy, it's comfortable. But you don't get anything done by being comfortable all the time, especially when you're trying to organize people in the heart of the empire.
And it's so weird because it seems like all these buzzwords develop on the left, right? And one of the ones going around right now is grifter. Everyone's a grifter. You're grifting. Do you know how many opportunities we have to sell out? Like Eddie just mentioned one of his first, I don't think people get that this ain't a money making thing. We don't make money on this. We do this because it's how we can contribute to the class struggle. And if we just, went against everything we stand for, I feel like that will be readily apparent. If one day we go, oh, actually, there is a Uyghur genocide, right? That ain't going to happen. Speaking of that, though, I always found those kind of liberals really strange because they go, the Chinese are committing genocide against the Uyghurs. And when you go, wait, let's see if that's true, they go, you're a genocide denier. That makes no logical sense to me. And I go, okay, so you murdered my parents.
And the paradox.
I didn't. I'm like, you're a murder denier,
And the paradox was that after that happened, you obviously start to see this rise in anti-Asian hate crimes in the U.S. And we make a connection of those hate crimes to the dehumanizing narrative of the imperialist media about China. And what do they respond, Eddie, with the most ridiculous and liberal response of stop tokenizing my, my people to push your agenda or whatever the fuck. It's bullshit. No, it's that your imperialist, pro-imperialist agenda that's coming from your petty bourgeois position is the one that's dehumanizing your people in the eyes of others who see them as a scapegoat for their conditions that are deteriorating and not the ruling class. And we're doing the thing that you should be doing if you actually cared about your people, which is humanizing them and showing how the things that they're saying, the barbarities that they're saying that they're doing to Muslim people is bullshit. It's bullshit, and it's coming from the country that has literally killed 4.5 million Muslims in the last 2 decades and displaced more than 50 million of them. They don't care about Muslim life. They're just dehumanizing the Chinese to wage their war against China.
I wish I could. The video's now taken down, but when that all went down on TikTok, there was a representative, Jim McGovern, who was pushing for more sanctions on Xinjiang, and he invited a bunch of different TikTokers onto his show to talk about this bill he was trying to pass to get more sanctions. And I ended up not getting invited on because I was so critical of it. I'm like, guys, this dude's just going to use you as a tool to push for sanctions. And the more liberal TikTok creators, like the careerist ones, it was so obvious. They just went right along with it, pushed for sanctions, thank you so much for meeting with us, Mr. Congressman. But thankfully, and I had some influence here, there was another TikTok creator named Adrian Antianoli, who now does fantastic work for PSL, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, does awesome, pretty much runs their TikTok page and is doing a great job. He got on that panel and questioned this guy, Jim McGovern, asked him a few critical questions, and the dude just fell apart. He had no answers. Adrian was basically saying, so if we sanction businesses in Xinjiang, and we stop commerce and trade in Xinjiang, how is that not going to hurt, the people of Xinjiang? How is that not going to hurt the Uyghurs? The Uyghurs, we're taking their jobs away. We're trying to sanction commerce and prosperity in these Uyghur communities. How is that going to help them? Well, we believe that sanctions are to enforce freedom. And it became really obvious to anyone who was critical of this guy's narrative that he was full of shit. So shout out to Adrian for that legendary moment. And I believe the video is not even on YouTube anymore because of the way it went down. So
Thank you for the $20 super chat, Pranav Simha. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Please let me know how to pronounce it correctly for the future. They say, I know that the Uyghur stuff is complete BS, but damn, how do you know for sure that the people took money to lie about it? If so, that's insane.
I don't know that they took money per se, but they took opportunities. Like that guy Jim McGovern is what I mean by an external force. And then there was this Cowboy Connor was the guy's name, and we were friends. He's a nice guy, but he had like 100,000 followers just from doing like anti-conservative memes, like dunking on conservatives. And he was making explicit videos talking on behalf of this guy, arguing for this bill. So he had somebody pushing him to make videos for a specific bill, calling for sanctions. And he felt, I made a video criticizing him very softly, and he felt pretty bad. And I don't know if he makes content anymore, honestly. But yeah, he had someone pushing him for sure.
There was also that kid who recently, maybe a few weeks ago, said that he had never been paid to do anything, and then it turned out he took a job like on Biden's staff.
Yeah.
So a lot of people like that. Like it's very obvious. What was it?
I didn't mean to interrupt, but the one that's always screaming in his videos.
Yeah, there's two of them. The one guy, the typical Democrat was his name. He split with me as soon as Biden got elected, or he was like, he followed us and pretended to be our friend. And then Biden gets elected and the dude makes a video. Biden immediately launches missiles at Syria. And this dude who's now being paid by the Biden administration to make TikTok propaganda makes a video saying, here's why these missile strikes were justified. Here's why they were targeted at terrorists and toppling the evil Assad regime. And all my friends are making videos criticizing him. I mean, TikTok used to be filled with anti-imperialists and socialists before they systematically censored all of us. So everyone's making a video about him. I go to make a video about him, and I see that he preemptively blocked me. Because he knew that I would criticize him for supporting Biden's missile strike. So that dude's been a sellout since day one. Don't trust a damn thing he has to say. He'll say whatever he has to for a check from the Democratic Party.
And even like the what the comrade here mentions, like sometimes having access to opportunities provides you a level of material security that's preferable to a direct paycheck, right? Mm-hmm. Because if those people can get involved in those campaigns, then they become on the track. They are placed on the track to be like Democratic Party operatives, and that provides a livelihood that getting a one-time paycheck wouldn't have. So exposing how those opportunities have material consequences, and how those material consequences then reciprocally show themselves in ideological positions and political positions taken by these people. I think it's more it's more important than just showing the connection of like this person getting paid directly by this institution, because they know what it means. A payment, maybe that's a one-time thing, but these opportunities, they accumulate, and they stand as a potential livelihood for these people one day.
It reminds me of one of the lessons Pops, my dad, taught me. That, people can take shortcuts, and they can take that payday, and you trade something for that. You trade a part of yourself. You trade sort of a part of your soul, right? If you believe in a soul, you are lesser for doing that. If you build up the way we do, we don't need their money. We all are working class people. We can, take care of things ourselves. Sometimes we struggle, whatever. But all of this, what we get is ours. And we do it in a way where we maintain our dignity. And then as we build up even the Institute, right? As opportunities come along, our name holds more weight because people know they can't buy us. They know that we are going to stand by the principled Marxist analysis no matter what. I'm signing some stuff, but like that anyway. That's what happened when Newsweek asked me to write an article, right? They knew my opinions and what the Institute stands for, and knows that we have a character that is above people that can be bought. And that's why names like ours hold that weight, where those can't and never can again. And I think a lot of people just don't think about that these days. Because
I wanted to say,
I just want to say, because it's gotten so bad, and people really, I don't blame people for needing money, but class struggle is more important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, like we've been accused of being grifters a lot, and obviously we reject that and have facts and history to reject that and show that we've rejected that in practice too, grifting. But
by the way, if we're grifters, we're the worst grifters ever.
Exactly right. But there is a problem with people grifting. Like it would have been very easy for me to steer into liberalism just because of social pressure, right? There wasn't anyone holding a carrot, with a stick and trying to lead me on, or offering me money, waving money in my face. But, if I would have capitulated at that point, think of how many opportunities would have opened up for me. Okay, this guy's willing to spread our Uyghur genocide narrative if he's talking to a congressman and if all of his friends are doing it. Now maybe the Biden administration comes to us with an offer when they're doing their TikTok propaganda program. It's like what we always say when we're talking about Gabriel Rockhill's work. It's some academics and propagandists are directly backed by the CIA and Ford Foundation and stuff, but a lot of the times they just create the theater for these puppets to come out and create a situation where you can become an intellectual superstar or a successful pundit or a successful journalist if you sell out. And that's exactly how the field of journalism works under capitalism, especially in America. The more you sell out, the more opportunities you're going to get. So you think that doesn't have an influence on people who might, otherwise have good intentions?
And at the subjective level, I'm sorry, we have a time difference. So at the subjective level, it even feels like they're not selling out, right? Because what you just feel like, oh wow, people are receptive to what I'm saying. It must be right. Let me continue doing it. But if they're literally getting money to say a specific thing, the conscience hits a lot sooner, because they could be like, well, is this payment manipulating what I think? But if you have that slow buildup of, oh, when I say this, we get more views, and it gets shared by this and it gets shared by that, that's easier to transform it. And you feel like the transformation is not one where the environment is transforming you, but you are finding yourself. And that is much more efficient than them just giving you directly money and you coming to realize, oh, I might be having these opinions because of the paycheck that I'm receiving directly from these people.
Well, also, Michael Parenti describes this entire process in media in his book, Inventing Reality, right? To give a sort of broad overview of it, the companies pick people who already have certain opinions a lot of the time, right? And let's say you're a young, intrepid reporter and you want to genuinely uncover corruption. You want to fight the good fight, right? You go in there, you write this giant expose on a huge corporation, and you go to file it, right? You give it to your editors and they go, ooh, you can't say this and this and this. Well, we work with that corporation. That corporation owns this other corporation we work with, blah, 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 right? Next time, you tailor your approach because you learned that lesson, right? And you leave pertinent information out. And then the editors go, still too much. And next time, you pick a different story altogether because you already know you can't get that through. That's what happens in corporate media a lot of the time.
Yeah, and it's not like it is the case sometimes that people are directly lying and misrepresenting the facts, but it's more often the case that the narrative is spun by omitting things, omitting context that would be essential for one to understand what the central point that the story is trying to focus on is really about.
What happens a lot of the time is the ones who are direct arms of the State Department, or the people who are direct arms of the State Department, like an Adrian Zenz, will cook up their propaganda and lies in a think tank, or in a non-governmental organization. And then they publish something like Adrian Zenz's Uyghur genocide narrative, and then the corporate media outlets just grab that and blast it over a megaphone. And they're all sourcing the same wrong, contrived, politically motivated source, but they're just doing it for clicks, and to continue being fed sources, being fed stories by these NGOs and think tanks that are basically arms of the ruling class.
Dude, exactly. And that's how so much anti-communist propaganda works. And there's multiple layers of that. After that happens once, anything, say, 10 years down the line, can then quote this old source that no one bothered to verify in the first place, right? And so where we're at now is a point where modern writers are like 40 sources away from the original source that was lying about something that happened in the Soviet Union, right? Like, I've done the work on some of the things with Stephen Kotkin's second book, right? His first book actually wasn't all that bad. His narratives were wrong, his conclusions were wrong, but a lot of his facts were actually correct. They added up to what the actual primary source, that first one, said. The second one, though, it seems like he let his research assistants just go buck wild, right? Because nothing lined up. And I found one going back to Robert Conquest, who was he was this British intelligence agent literally working for the bourgeois governments to lie about communism. And it drives me crazy because everything is like this. And people can't be expected to check, do these hours and hours of work to check if something is true or not. And so they just end up believing. And it's just sad.
Yeah, that research assistant thing is true, especially for the people that are getting big editorial book contracts every year. And we're not going to act like there's not a couple of those on the left that are looked up to by a lot of Marxist Leninists, and that you get you're given 2 or 3 undergraduate students that you tell them, look through these sources, try to find these sources, find me whatever talks about this and that. And it's not a relatively rigorous process, but it's got loose ends, and in those loose ends there's the possibility of narratives being spun in ways that are devoid of truth, and that's always a danger. And I don't know how it's possible, especially for these people working in history, that you have to do so much source engagement. Philosophy, maybe you can crank out a book a year and be fine, but with history, there's so much reading that you have to do, and then figuring out how to provide that narrative in your own voice. That when people are cranking out a book a year and they're historians, be careful, right?
There's something wrong there.
There's something wrong there. It's not possible to get really, really good scholarship done in that field within a year. Usually it takes a little bit more than that. And that's not to say that as soon as they finish one book, they'll start the next one and it really takes a year. A lot of these projects are older, but there's a lot of space for sloppiness, especially when you have research assistants and stuff.
Gerald Sorry, what?
And that might help explain too. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I like this. Ironically, NGOs and propaganda creation always has a central committee that promulgates such imperialist propaganda. So, yeah, we can't have socialism because the news outlets will be owned by the government, by the central committee. But we can have capitalism where a central committee lies to us so that we we go to war.
Absolutely. But do you guys want to hop on to our first scheduled topic of the day?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, so we're going to talk about first the uh, recent vote that took place with the UPS workers who are organized by the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. Um, The Teamsters at the logistics company authorized a strike by an overwhelming 97% majority. Workers at UPS, organized under the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, voted overwhelmingly 97% in favor to authorize a strike, which may occur if contract negotiations fail on July 31st. So, again, a similar setup to what we saw with the railroad workers. Uh, uh, the threat to strike comes after certain failed negotiations with the company. If UPS does not acquiesce to the workers' core demands, such as higher pay for part timers, more full time jobs, and an end to the unfair 22.4 tiered labor system, workers will indeed strike on August 1st. And for those that don't know, the 22.4 tiered labor system was named after the 2018 contract provision that created a tier of lower paid full time workers while the average annual pay for their UPS driver is $95,000, making it a rare job that offers somewhat of a livable pay, a pension, and benefits without requiring a college degree. Newer drivers who are slotted into the 22.4 category do the same work as more senior drivers, but while the latter's pay tops out at $41 an hour, the 22.4's ceilings is $6 per hour less. So their top ceilings would be $35 an hour. Importantly, these newer drivers also lack comparable control over their schedules. Such a situation creates a higher turnover amongst the 22.4s, another benefit to the company given the greater compensation that seniority brings. So it's one of these new methods that are being used to cut into the wages that people are making, to pay people less, while at the same time you have inflation across society such that even when the pay increases, it never catches up to inflation, and it's always a drop in terms of the real wages. While you have that going on, you have at the same time direct attacks on the wages of workers, and these UPS drivers will be making six whole dollars less an hour, which of course accumulates, and it's also conjoined with less control over the work that they do, and that means that the capitalist not only has more control, but they also save on cost of production, which means effectively more profits.
That, this really hits home because the inflation and wage increase thing is something we're struggling over at my workplace right now. None of us were paid enough to even account for inflation. So when you we all get a cost of living increase every year, right? When it's not tied to inflation, you end up making less than you made last year if prices are rising. And they're rising like crazy right now. We did the math, and all of us are generally making at least $2 or $3 an hour less in real wages, which is unacceptable. Previously, before COVID, we had a sort of informal workers alliance rather than union. We're a small shop, but it was an organized thing, and it fell apart during COVID because we ran out of money. But this is getting people active again because everybody's pissed. And here's the thing: when the union has your back, the union has your back, right? And so we're getting things done this way, and this is really, really, it ties into the other thing I want to say, because one of the only complaints people have when you begin organizing a union is, well, unions base everything on seniority. What are we going to do if the union says, oh, these guys have been here, longer, you can't make as much? Look what these guys are doing, right? Look what they're doing. They're hooking up the people that haven't been there as long, because when the union has your back, it has your back.
Absolutely. And we covered this on TikTok earlier too. The way American politicians are responding is by trying to break the strike.
Mhm.
Of course, even though one of these politicians, Mark Wayne Mullen, I believe, former cage fighter who got into it with Sean O'Reilly, one of the Teamsters bosses. I believe I'm getting their names right. But he got called out on downplaying the wages of the UPS workers or on trying to portray them as being larger than they were. And the union boss called him out and he said, "Shut your mouth," and then was like trying to physically intimidate him. And it's just it's wild that guy is an elected representative in a state that has some of the lowest wages in the United States, where, as you guys have explained, wages are abysmally low. And rather than increase those wages, or rather than try and serve his constituency, he's shouting down the unions and trying to intimidate the unions and break the strike. So this is why we need to band together and be strong in the face of that crap, because class struggle is always going to involve the ruling class, their side of the struggle as well. They're always going to try and break you down and gaslight you, for lack of a better word. You're stupid, you're privileged, you want air conditioning, you selfish workers, your wages are already high enough. All this nonsense from somebody who's rich and pampered and is making tons of money from our taxes and our hard work and labor.
Absolutely. And it's these are things that are repeating themselves. It happened. The largest coverage it got was with the rail workers, where the federal government stepped in to try to mediate the negotiations. It couldn't do that. The workers voted democratically to use strike as an instrument in their bargaining for the things that they desired, and then the federal government illegalized their capacity to strike. I wouldn't be surprised if something potentially similar ends up happening here, just because of the influence that the UPS workers have on the economy. But Sean O'Brien he got elected in the last elections for the Teamsters. He's the first candidate to the first candidate after a long time of Hoffa, and then specifically Hoffa's son. And even though this is UPS, Sean O'Brien has pledged to send all of his members on strike if the company refuses to eliminate the tiered system. By the way, I'm wearing a Teamsters local shirt today, just for the segment. I have a few of them, but I wear them with pride. The article, and this is, by the way, from People's Dispatch, and the comments from on the tiered system they come from an article from Alex Press. I just wanted to give credit, but their strike could have massive repercussions as UPS workers move 6% of the GDP in the U.S. UPS is the largest private sector union in this country and really can set the standards for everyone. It's not a well-kept secret that once we get the best contract possible, which may not include having to strike, we're planning on taking to Amazon and leading a unionization effort there. And that was from Kyle, a UPS worker organized with the Teamsters for the last 12 years in Westchester, Pennsylvania. So again, it's not just a narrow craft struggle. They're realizing that their interest in their specific craft, in their specific field, is tied to the interest of workers in other fields. And that's a fundamental step forward into a much more class conscious expression of the consciousness you see in this rising new militant labor movement. I think it's quite historic.
The historic is the exact right word. We're witnessing people on the edge of a mass class consciousness. And this is one of the reasons we're always so critical of the left, because they're getting left behind.
Yeah.
Right? They're so interested in middle class bickering that they can't see what's happening in the world and the real class struggle going on. They're always talking about how we need local connections. Get them. They're there for all of you. For all of us. I saw a comment a minute ago where he was talking about how he's in West Virginia, in Trump country, and he's gotten support from everybody around him by just talking to them and treating them with humanity rather than shaming them and arguing with them. That's what we need right now. We need a force that can unite all of these working class people and show everybody that it's not just within similar fields, it's all of us that have the same interest. I would not be surprised if Taft-Hartley gets directly attacked in the next couple of years. Right? I really think we'll be able to just start having solidarity strikes. They start with things like organized call-offs, right?
Yeah.
But they keep going if you have a concrete institution able to drive that and organize it. And it's really not that hard. You make a couple phone calls, right?
Yeah.
You call the Teamsters, you go, how can we help? And then you call another union and go, okay, you can do this. Another one, you can do that. It's all just about organization.
Right. Yeah. And like when they do go on strike, go stand on the picket line with them and bring them food. Say, I'm here with the Communist Party, or I'm here with the labor club, of the Communist Party, whatever. And you'll talk, like, just warning you. I know everyone in our audience probably is okay with this, but a lot of leftists wouldn't be. You're going to meet Trump supporters on the picket line, but it's about class struggle, not necessarily the politics, and talk to them and you'll see why they voted for Trump. A lot of them feel sold out by neoliberalism. A lot of them are older union guys who used to vote Democrat before Bill Clinton, before the Democrats abandoned the labor movement. Trump promised to be a labor president, which he wasn't, but a lot of people took a chance on him, and a lot of people were let down. But and I also think that this whole thing with the UPS and the fact that they're now coming for Amazon, it shows the real importance of Noah's theory of reproletarianization, because I really reject this idea that it's the service workers and transport workers and all these workers who are vital to the American economy today aren't real proletarians. They are. This is what the proletariat is now. Obviously, we need to get to the industrial unions too. We need to get to agricultural workers as well, for sure. But transport workers, delivery workers, the service industry, Amazon, this is a huge, huge part of the American economy nowadays. And they're getting organized. Like, that's where the revolutionary energy is a lot of it's at Starbucks and Amazon. And it's partially because the wages for these workers are so freaking abysmally low. So to reject what they're doing I think would be a huge strategic blunder for communists. Instead, we should embrace it, urge them on, and forge as deep a connections with them as we can.
Here's a really good comment from our comrade Louis. He says, I was surrounded by Trump supporters in UAW. A lot of them were more progressive than any of the county Democrats. That's absolutely true. That's why this image that a lot of the left portrays of what Trump country is, it's so very foreign to what you actually find when you're in Trump country, which is the deep Midwest, the Rust Belt area. You find very kind people who are not bigots, who might not have the wokest views on some of the more recent developments of our social morality, but who are people that are guided by treating others with dignity and with a certain level of basic humanity, and who don't want anyone else to be harmed, or who want their communities to flourish. And these are people whose very immediate needs are grounded in their material condition as exploited workers, and those are conditions that ripple into their families and into their communities. And it's definitely a area of American society that could be organized in a revolutionary manner.
1,000%, brother. It's wild. And we say this all the time, right? I flip Trump people left and right. Like, it's easier to talk to working class Trump voters than it is to talk to the remnants of the middle class who call themselves communists, right? They're so concerned with their middle class interests that align with our bourgeoisie that they completely miss the fact that this country is in a direct struggle right now. The struggle is becoming incredibly acute. People cannot keep going on in the old way. The stability of the middle classes is gone for almost everyone. And the remnants of that middle class can't see that. They can't see out of that middle class. and push that and sort of project it onto everyone else, you know?
We'll be talking next week with Chris Townsend, who recently wrote a wonderful article for Marxism-Leninism Today on the 1933 Communist Party Extraordinary Conference, where they tackled the question of why was it that the character of the Communist Party was primarily centered in the intelligentsia and certain petty bourgeois elements. And they agreed that while they were making some advances, in order to make more qualitatively progressive advancements, they needed to reroute their organizations and ground themselves in the working class. And so there was this big movement where everyone agreed to ground themselves in the development of the labor movement, to pick leaders in the party that come from the labor movement, so that any semblance of petty bourgeois consciousness could be avoided. And that's the period where the Communist Party completely explodes. It's a period of the Great Depression, and in many, many, many ways resembles a lot the condition that we are in today. And the conference call resembles a lot the calls that we've been making. I know I end the purity fetish and the crisis of Western Marxism with an argument that we need to really reflect, socialist organizations need to reflect on their PMC character, on their middle class character, and reground themselves materially in the working class. And that Chris Townsend article really drives it home very well, drawing that homology, that analogy between our context and 1933 and the Great Depression. So look forward to that conversation sometime next week. But the workers have been winning a few things. For instance, on June 13, they had won a tentative agreement on air conditioning in UPS trucks. This has become a significant working conditions issue as workers have died or gotten severely ill from hot temperatures during the summer. We had a joke from Sam Dixon in one of the Basics of Marxism classes that we recently did. Um, the joke was, damn, I can't remember the joke, but it was something along him asking the people that he's talking to in the process of radicalizing them, specifically people in this area, asking them why are they so sweaty, and then they have to say, "Well, I don't have air conditioner in the car that I'm working in. Why don't you have air conditioner?" And then that leads to the process of radicalization. But
let me real quick interrupt, Carlos. Sam, one of the students in our class, told that exact story. Is it coming from him?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. His whole point was class consciousness can begin from simply going, "Why are you so sweaty, bro?"
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, socialism with "why you so sweaty, bro" characteristics. But look at these pictures, man. 117 degrees inside the car. 121.4 degrees inside the car. And then this one, at one moment, it was 150 fucking degrees inside the car. That is completely absurd, and that's the condition that they were in. Thankfully, they won air conditioners in their recent victory, but we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar corporation that has failed to deliver in a lot of things. And the president of the Teamsters, Sean O'Brien, said that if they don't act accordingly, that they can expect that the workers will use their labor, which is fundamental for these companies' profit, of course. They will leverage their labor accordingly so that they can acquire the things that they're asking for. Hopefully, the federal government doesn't step in as it did with the rail workers, but we'll see.
For sure. I've got just an anecdotal note. I've got friends who worked for Amazon who are like wrestlers, all American wrestlers, tough guys who have cut weight their entire life, run in hot rooms and sweat and stuff like that, who didn't make it a week at Amazon because they were like, dude, they literally put tags on the workers now that measure how much work you're doing and how many hours you're spending in the bathroom. Literally like tags. And then there are managerial staff and administrative staff, professional managerial class people who are hired to manage the workers and manage the labor, which leads to a lot of discontent with the workers towards the professional managerial class when ultimately their real exploiter is the shareholders. But it's crazy. Like there are stories out of Amazon of people peeing in bottles. Pretty much everyone says that. My friend in real life who worked for Amazon said that as well. And Tons of stories of people passing out from heat stroke, from running back and forth. And yeah, the working conditions are abysmal. And we live in a country that's incredibly adversarial to unions. Like that politician we were talking about earlier, the Mullen, the former cage fighter guy who was getting into it with O'Brien and trying to shout him down and intimidate the unions and break the strike. Like, that shouldn't even be, like, that should be the end of his political career forever. If you piss on your constituency like that, you should never be elected again. We should have that level of class consciousness. But over the last 40 years of neoliberalism, we've gotten to the point where politicians feel comfortable just yelling at their constituency and saying, no, you're being paid enough. We're not giving you air conditioning. And even in other capitalist countries like the UK, where they have more union organization, like I'm pretty sure that would be unheard of, even for like a Tory politician to do that. So we're moving in the right direction in the US, but we've got a lot of work to do. Like after Carlos, or one of you was talking about the wildcat strikes after World War II and after the Great Depression was the strongest surge in the union movement in American history, but that was followed by Taft-Hartley and this huge crackdown on unions. And that's only continued over the last 40 years of neoliberalism. So we got to fight back against that and build these worker combinations, is what I like to look at unions as.
Yeah, I want to touch on this. What was his name? The politician, Eddie.
It's like John something Mullen.
Mullen. Okay.
He probably drives a Benz that keeps him in nice cold
Mark
air.
Wayne Mullen. Sorry.
He's a spoiled little rich kid, apparatchik of finance capital, and that's all he is. And here's the thing, and this ties into the whole like problems with the left, right? They do these things because they know they are confident. People will go, yeah, but you can't blame him. What, are you going to vote for a Republican? He's the lesser of two evils, right? And that shit has to stop. There is no world. And by the way, let this dude try to physically intimidate me. Anyway, there is no world where that can function anymore, right? Yeah. There is no more. They're not as bad as the others. They're just as bad. Look at what this guy just did, right? How are you going to shout at the union leaders that control that many votes for you? They don't give a shit about us. So it's time we organize and take power from them.
What these politicians don't realize is that they're literally doing us a favor because they're proving our theory in practice, the way that the government functions essentially as an instrument of the monopoly capitalist. And this is a really good point from Dust. UPS is a giant in the industry. A victory for UPS worker raises the entire industry standards, absolutely. And because of the connection, because these unions contain within them a variety of different industries, it also hopefully raises the imagination and possibility and consciousness of workers in other industries. I believe Kyle was the person mentioning it in the interview. They're going for Amazon next. So the consciousness is one that goes beyond their specific craft. And Jesus Christ Superstar, great name, says, Eddie, Noah, and Carlos, can y'all get a UPS union member on the show to talk about Teamsters and UPS? Yes, we can. Actually, some of our friends at Class Unity are organizing an effort in their labor, in the labor section of their organization. They have some people that are in the UPS struggle and who've been organizing for quite a few months now. So we'll reach out to them and get an interview on that subject. And I was also contacted a few days ago by the people from Miami DSA who wanted to let me know that they're doing a labor fund for the UPS strikers. So if you're in the Miami area and you work with them, it might be cool to get involved with DSA in Miami. I know we have a lot of good friends there from Troika Collective. DSA is somewhat of a mixed bag, but I've heard that the Miami one is fairly good. We have some of our friends from Troika there. So if you want to donate, they're doing a labor fund, solidarity fund for the UPS workers in case they strike, so that they have funds that can help the people with the needs that they'll have.
It's so interesting that in Miami, in the heart of anti-communism, you have like the best DSA club in the country. But maybe we should play that TikTok I made about the Mullen guy. Respond to this first. Battle Cossack. People don't know what Marxism is. That's why they call itself for buying stuff made in capitalist countries. My own mother says I can't be a communist because I once bought fast food. Yeah, people. And I explained this in a tweet recently. Like, people don't realize that Marxism sees capitalism as, you know, a more progressive economic system than slavery or feudalism. It increases the productive forces. It increases humans' mastery over nature and creates the possibility for socialism. So there's nothing contradictory. I mean, in fact, Marx says that the instruments of capitalism will be used to bring about its own destruction. The stuff that's made under capitalism is what we use to take capitalism down, which is, you know, that's dialectical. The contradictions within a thing lead to change and lead it to become another thing. So, yeah.
Those gas station. Thank you, comrade. Those gas station burgers that Dust is eating, they're fueling a revolutionary. So capitalism is producing its own gravediggers and feeding him too. Those are big burgers, man. I looked at that last one you posted. Two big old burger patties. That's revolutionary fuel.
Always making me hungry with this burger. Right? I'm like, that looks like a heart attack, but it looks amazing.
I haven't eaten all day, and even seeing that, I was like, oh, God.
There's this clip of Theo Vaughn where someone calls in and he's like, the guy's like, I went to Burger King and they're doing 10 nuggets for $1 and they're doing this deal, and then I ended up getting diarrhea. And he's like, dude, $10, 10 nuggets for $1, that's not a deal. That's I forget what it was, but he ended up saying, like, you paid them $1 and then you shit yourself. Yeah, but
real quick, I want to mention the whole, like, the sort of iPhone argument. Like, how are you a communist? You bought an iPhone, right? Anytime that comes up, I always, if anyone wants to, you know, have a good hint, go, how do you think change happens? We don't just like choose a system, you know?
What better example? We have a firsthand example of the instruments of capitalism being used to bring about its destruction with what we're doing right now, this stream. You know, like, how stupid would we be if we were like, no, we don't like capitalism, so we're not going to buy computers and microphones and, you know, do an extremely popular show. And I mean, a show that's growing in popularity, where we educate people on how to organize against the capitalist mode of production. Like, you would just have to be a freaking moron. That's like Battle Kozak said. That's just people who don't understand Marxism, right? And also remember, like, don't engage in this like moralizing or this purity where you're like shaming people. Like, you know, we're teasing Dust James, but like, we don't think any less of him because he buys fast food or whatever. Like, some people take this super moralistic and condescending approach to stuff like that. And this is not productive.
It's PMC. It's a PMC form of.
Someone just figured out the secret, Carlos. Hold on. That's it.
Socialism button.
That's what we do.
Xi Jinping has abolished the commodity form button, and he just doesn't press it.
What a douche, dude.
What's the class origin of that moralizing attitude? It's the PMC. It's the middle classes, right? That now they find themselves reproletarianized, but with the same social consciousness of their middle class parents. But you know, you don't have that form of sociality amongst working people. So it's a class phenomenon, and we shouldn't see it as just this universal thing. There's a big chunk of the working population that doesn't have that form of engagement.
Let me butt in real quick, Carlos, because this happens to me frequently. When someone will say something moralizing about me, like, why won't you cancel so-and-so with me? And I'm like, look, man, that's a middle-class prejudice. And I go through this thing, and they're like, why would you ever assume my class background like that? You don't know me as an individual. And like, I mean, the real answer is these things are a general thing. It's not an individual thing. But I always go, well, where you're from, right? Like, let's be real. You know you're middle class and you're just mad that I called it.
Well, they have to redefine what middle class is.
Mhm.
And they end up with a definition of class or a way of thinking about class that's only quantitatively different from the liberal notion, because liberals end up thinking about class in terms of like income. And so there's, it fits very nicely into the Occupy Wall Street understanding of like the 99 and the 1%, which might be helpful for agitational purposes, but it's not scientific. It's not the Marxist understanding of class. And they seem to be thinking about class in those broader terms, which for some things might be helpful, but for understanding where some of their social conscious biases are stemming from, it's not. But by the way, it is Dust James's birthday, so happy birthday, Comrade Dust.
Happy birthday.
We also received a super chat from Comrade David Burney, the OG Patreon. Afternoon, my brothers. Much love. Much love back to you, Comrade David. Thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciated. As we always say, it's essential for keeping up the work here that we do at the Institute. But yeah.
Do you know how many times I've been told middle class is not a Marxist term, by the way? I mean, you can search like any document that Marx or Engels wrote and see middle class. But here's the thing. They don't get it because they have that metaphysical version of class where it's based on an individual and it cuts off the actual class relations we're talking about, where you're not in a class that's in an antagonism with the bourgeois class. You're this singular thing and it describes your job. But that's not it either. Class is a whole thing that develops out of production and changes. And when we say middle class, we're talking about people who fall somewhere between that antagonism between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. That's all.
For sure. Do you guys still want to play the TikTok about that John Wayne Mullen guy so people can get an idea of who he is? Let me present this. Share screen. Window, TikTok.
Sound like my 13-year-old.
I'm working with without my second monitor today, so it's really confusing me, but we'll figure it out. Oops, I gotta keep it up.
That's one of the best pictures ever.
I think he made that when he was sick, and I think we forced him to stream or something.
What's that?
The picture to the TikTok, the MJ
It's
and
not
Pippin.
working.
No, I just said it's one of the best ones ever.
Oh.
No, the video's not working. The video's not showing. If
yeah, I'm trying to play it right now. Here, let me represent it. 1 second.
I forget who we were interviewing, but Eddie had the flu, and that was because that picture's from the flu game. It's MJ and Pippin.
Oh, that's right. I powered through the flu. Is it working now? Is it playing?
Nope. Yeah,
If you
there's
want,
no video pulled up at all.
We see the page, but we don't see the video.
Yeah, I can. Very weird.
If you can scroll through and find it, that'll work. We can keep going while you do it that way.
Yeah.
I think.
Here, I got it.
Inception.
Demands like air conditioning in their vehicles, which is trying to Republican politician and former cage fighter Mark Wayne Mullen has been trying to intimidate the UPS workers who are threatening a strike right now. And these are workers who are making very basic demands like air conditioning in their vehicles, which they don't currently have. But Mark Mullen is a warrior for corporate America, and he thinks these workers are being greedy. At a recent Senate hearing, Mullen tried saying that UPS workers are making more money than they actually do. And when called out on it by a union boss, he said, "Shut your mouth." Because, why would a politician care about the wages of working class people in his state? All he cares about is the profits of corporations that pay for his campaigns. And the lower he can keep the wages, the higher the profits will be. It's clear that Buddy thinks he can intimidate people because he's a cage fighter or whatever. But look at my ears, big dog. I ain't scared of you. And recently the dude was caught standing on a box to make himself look taller at the podium. It's so obvious he's just trying to be intimidating. Well, Lenin was 5'5", and he's 10 times the man you'll ever be, Marky Mark. That's a nice booster seat you got there, though. Republican politician and...
That's awesome. Awesome. It's always the spoiled rich kids and the people doing their work that try to tell working people who actually work for what they get that they're being greedy,
And someone named Meatwad Mike in our TikTok comments told me something I didn't even know. The dude owns 4 businesses in Oklahoma. So he's making money off the backs of these workers and then telling the UPS workers they're being greedy for wanting freaking air conditioning. And I was in Oklahoma the other day. It's, not only are in his area our wages some of the lowest in the country, but Oklahoma is struggling, dude. I was in Tulsa. There's a huge homeless problem. The infrastructure's crumbling. They're right when you drive into Tulsa, there's an advertisement where there's where you can get loans for bail bonds. So you can, to bail yourself out of jail or your friend out of jail, you take out a loan that you got to pay back with interest. Talk about a trap, a way of using the legal system and the financial system to entrap people and just suck money out of them. So that's what's going on in Oklahoma. And this guy's scolding the workers from his booster seat for trying to get organized and increase conditions for everyone in society. Because, the rising tide raises all boats, like we've kind of been saying. So, yeah, solidarity with these workers. These workers are pro-humanity, pro-society, pro-masses. Mark Wayne Mullen is pro-business, pro a handful of oligarchs.
Pro-parasite.
Wayne Mullen.
But, the second segment that we were going to cover is the very sad passing of Daniel Ellsberg, of course, the whistleblower who made history in 1971 by releasing the Pentagon Papers, a top-secret study of the U.S. military's invasion of Vietnam. He passed away peacefully in his home in California on June 16th. Do you guys know a little bit about the Pentagon Papers that you'd like to riff off? Because I have some stuff here marked, but if you want to go off the top, we can.
Go ahead, Eddie.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I mean, you can read them off, and I'll add anything extra if I have after that. I just know Mike Gravel also passed away recently, right? And within the last few years, and he was the one who read the Pentagon Papers into the congressional record, which was a heroic move. And I just want to contrast that to Julian Assange. We need some politicians or some leaders in this country to stand up for Assange, and they're just not. They're tucking their tails and running. Rather than reading the information that he revealed into public record or, doing stuff like that to show solidarity with Assange's journalism. And instead, they're either silent or they're cheering on his extradition and prosecution, which is disgusting. And, I have nothing but contempt for the spineless cowards in Washington or in the field of journalism, especially, who are selling out one of their own in Assange and cheering on the prosecution of someone who revealed that the U.S. military was gunning down people with helicopters or civilians with helicopters, or that the Democratic Party was rigging the supposedly democratic election against Bernie Sanders and the people. So, and solidarity with Daniel Ellsberg, too. He's been attacked and persecuted by the ruling class for what he revealed.
It's a stark contrast, and it tells you something about the power of the people. Back then, working class people were a bit more organized and could force things like this. This was in the New York Times, right? Like, first of all, Ellsberg will go down in history as one of the greatest heroes in American media, right? But the New York Times published the Pentagon Papers, right? The New York Times. Nowadays, the Times are cheering on the extradition of Julian Assange. So somewhere between then and now, with the working class having lost its power, I mean, let's face it, the last generation did us dirty. They did. They left us with what we have now. And we are in a severe position of retreat, only trying to pick up the pieces from the ball they dropped, which shattered. Anyway, the media now is completely consolidated, and the ability of people to actually break in and get something like this out there is next to nothing. We're only now in 2023 making the first steps to be able to do that. I had something else to add, but now I forget what it was.
No worries, but part of what the Pentagon Papers showed was that the U.S., as has always been the case, was lying to its people about the Vietnam War. I am reminded of that old quote: "The first casualty of war is the truth." Many people have attributed to many people, so I don't know who to attribute it to, but it's someone's quote. The U.S. had not bombed and invaded Vietnam to save the Vietnamese from communism, as the papers revealed. Of course, as Noah mentioned, it was published. The first major newspaper that published it was the New York Times, and these massive revelations, of course, played a role in helping to bring about the end of the war. Neil Sheehan, who is the New York Times journalist who led the effort to process and publish the papers on June 13th, 1971, wrote that the government's goal in the war was to maintain, quote, the power, influence, and prestige of the United States, irrespective of the conditions of Vietnam. So, of course, the interest for the Vietnam War was material. It wasn't for any good cause to save the Vietnamese people from the evil of communism. It was to maintain as best as they could the influence of the American imperialism in the region, and to prevent that region from going to the side that actually represented humanity, which was the socialist camp. Ellsberg is remembered fondly by many in the U.S. anti-war movement. According to his son, Robert, his father had told him shortly before his death, quote, if he were to have a gravestone, that he would say, quote, he became a part of the anti-Vietnam and anti-nuclear movement. So someone who's been anti-war through and through throughout his whole life. His efforts didn't stop in 1971 or 1973. He's always been an anti-war activist and an activist in favor of those who, like him, are whistleblowers who are being targeted by the state. Of course, the archetypical example there is Julian Assange, but there's others like Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning who we can point to as well. Ellsberg was charged under the Espionage Act of 1917, the same act that Eugene Debs and many other socialist and anti-war militant labor activists were charged with for protesting against the carnage of the First World War. The same law being used to persecute today journalists like Julian Assange, Snowden, and others for revealing war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan, Snowden for revealing how the NSA spies on Americans. All charges against him were dropped in 1973, just 2 years after he released the papers. In his final years, Ellsberg continues to participate in the anti-war movement, fighting for the release of Assange. So that's that. I also have a short video that we can watch. That's Ellsberg talking about the sort of devastation that would be wrought about by nuclear war. If you guys want to touch on that, but first, your comments.
Sorry, video first or comments first?
No, your comments first. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Actually, this is perfect that you brought this up. As Seamoon said earlier, oops, I forgot to star the comment. But they said that The Pentagon Papers and Ellsberg revealed the U.S.'s secret bombing campaign against Laos and Cambodia. And for those, I mean, Laos is one of the most underappreciated, understudied Marxist-Leninist countries in the world. So actually, this week I've been diving deep into Laos and the historical development of the country. Obviously, they have a tight bond with Vietnam, but they're socialist, run by a communist party to this day, a Marxist-Leninist party. They're a very agrarian society, very low level of industry, partially because of the CIA secret war. But they are the most bombed country on the planet. They had more bombs dropped on them during the 60s and 70s than even Vietnam, including Agent Orange and napalm. And actually, about a third of the bombs didn't even detonate. So they're in Laos to this day, which is a huge safety hazard. Since the bombing stopped, over 1,000 Lao farmers have been blown up by exploding bombs that are just left behind. And what's insane about this is they lied about it every step of the way. There are public briefings or press conferences where JFK and Richard Nixon are saying there is no war going on in Laos. There is no actual attack going on in Laos. They admitted to maybe doing things covertly, by doing something in Laos, but they said over and over again, we are not bombing Laos. Meanwhile, dropping more bombs on Laos than any other country in the world ever in human history, right? So keep that in mind when somebody calls you a conspiracy theorist, or when you hear someone get smeared as a conspiracy theorist for telling the truth about Ukraine. They were willing to decimate this country with cluster bombs, which are, now considered a war crime, while lying about it every step of the way. And that shows how important Daniel Ellsberg was and how important these papers were. And it shows why it enraged the ruling class so much, because they were trying to completely cover this up, shove this under the rug. But the Laotian people are another amazing example, so similar to Vietnam, so similar to Korea, where the U.S. just did everything they could, bombed them to smithereens, destroyed the infrastructure, destroyed the agriculture, while dumping millions and millions of dollars into political opposition in the country, into preferred groups in the country. And yet the country is communist to this day. The country is socialist to this day. The country is following a Marxist-Leninist path to this day. So nothing but respect for those comrades, and nothing but contempt for the pseudo-socialists who supported the Vietnam War back in the day while claiming to be Marxists. The real Marxists are our comrades building socialism. Sorry.
Yeah, Adorno, right? The people, you go into the academy and you say, I'm a Marxist, I want to study Marxist philosophy, and they tell you, oh, here's Adorno, and here's Horkheimer, the people who supported the war in Vietnam. But look, American imperialism has been vicious all over the world. The things it's done in Latin America, the fascistic dictatorships it's propped up, the things it's done in the Middle East, millions dead. But the things it's done in South and Southeast Asia, I mean, my God, millions and millions and millions of people massacred, and horrendous bombing campaigns. It's imperialism is a vicious monster. If capitalism came to the scene from head to toe, filled with blood and dirt, as Marx says in Capital, imperialism is that same monster, but larger and with more blood and more dirt. It's just
and had fire.
And fire, yeah. Ben, thank you, Ben, for the $10 super chat. He says, gotta go move house, but you guys keep up the good work. Thank you, brother, for the $10 super chat. That's fundamental for the work here that we're doing at the Institute. Thank you so much. But I wanted to play a quick video.
Real quick before that, yeah. Carlos, I just want to say on the topic of the viciousness of imperialism, but on the topic of the viciousness of imperialism, a lot of people, we don't really think about how horrible sanctions are. Sanctions force people to live in torturous conditions. They prevent companies ad hoc from the ruling class here from bringing in goods that the people need. They're literally designed in order to make a people so living in such bad conditions that they will revolt against their government. That's what they're designed to do. And that's why they target anti-imperialist communist countries. That's all. I'm sorry I had to interrupt. I really wanted to mention that.
No, that's so important. I had a conversation with JB on his show on RBN on Sunday about the role that sanctions play against Cuba, and concretely how it functions. Because we drop the word sanction and blockade quite often, but a lot of the people don't know how it is, and they tend to see it as most things when you have a metaphysical worldview, a purity fetish worldview, in a very static and fixed sense. But it's something that's dynamic and really puts a stranglehold on any country that's trying to participate in a planned socialist economic existence, because you can't really plan when there's constantly things changing thanks to the blockade and the sanctions, and it's very hard to make long and medium term plans, and it ends up forcing these countries that are already in a very negative position because of colonially inherited difficulties and limited resources, etc. It ends up forcing them to engage in the market in such a way where they end up having to sell the things that they make at a very low price so that it's worth for the people buying it, and end up buying the things that they need at a very high price so that it's worth for the people selling it. So that's all forced on, and the same case with Laos as with Cuba, which is that these attacks by imperialism haven't weakened the people's will. The people are still riding with the socialist revolution, and all they're really bringing about is not their desired end of overthrowing the socialist government, but suffering. Senseless suffering is the only thing that they're bringing about. But
and what's so, I'm sorry, one more thing, and then we probably should move on to the video. But what's incredible about Cuba is they're an island nation right under the nose of the U.S. I love Laos. It's so interesting to study them, and North Korea. But let's be honest, or the DPRK. But let's be honest, without China right there, would be next to impossible for them to survive. And without, Laos is deeply connected to the Vietnamese economy to the point where it could be almost considered the same economy, because they work together so closely as bordering socialist nations under attack from imperialism. But Cuba is just like on an island, now they have solidarity from Nicaragua and Venezuela, thank God, which is why the U.S. has been increasing military presence in the Caribbean and in Colombia for the last 10 years. But they're right under the nose of the U.S. Whole island is surrounded by the U.S. Navy. The whole Caribbean is swarming with the U.S. Navy, and if you try and trade with them, they'll literally intercept it and pirate it back to the U.S. So it's terrible conditions that Cuba's trying to build socialism in, but it's so inspiring that they're still socialist, still independent.
And they're succeeding despite all that. They have so many amazing things there. Looking at Havana, it's picturesque.
Yes, and I just if there's a critique that I have of China is that I wish that they would engage in trade with Cuba as the Soviet Union did, but that's something that's afforded to Vietnam and Laos and Korea because of their proximity to China. That's not afforded to, unfortunately, to Cuba. But let me put this video up. If anyone wants to check out this podcast series, I'm going to link the thing to the comment section. There's 6 of them, and each of them is a short 3 minutes. But we're going to watch the last one. That's about, the devastation that could be brought about by nuclear war.
How can it be that this program remains? Why are we thinking of spending $250 billion over the next 30 years, $100 billion in the next 10 years to produce a replacement for the Minuteman III, when we should eliminate the Minuteman III, the current ICBMs, altogether rather than replacing them? Why is it? Mainly because it's profitable to Northrop Grumman or its rivals, Boeing or Lockheed, to produce this. And not only to them. If it was only those corporations, no doubt it would be easier to oppose it. But they have carefully distributed the earnings from that and the jobs and the votes and everything across 35 states. And we should have eliminated it in the early or mid 60s. That's half a century ago. Our country, the first to use nuclear weapons against humans, has led the way at every step of the way here in the escalation of the arms race. The nuclear war planners, of which I was one, who have written plans to kill billions of people, was a conspiracy to commit omnicide, near omnicide, the death of everyone, a conspiracy to together, secretly, to carry out, under some conditions, massacre. Can humanity survive the nuclear era? We don't know. I choose to act as if we have a chance.
That is so goddamn powerful. It really puts things in perspective. It reminds me of when I was a kid. I remember having to see nuclear, arms race stuff when it was with the Soviet. It's terrifying. And we shouldn't have to deal with that, especially when it is our ruling class keeping this going. It isn't anyone else. The only reason any other countries have nukes is because of our ruling class and what they've proven they will do to other people. And what he talks about just there, they've literally made plans to massacre the entire human race, except for them. Like Fallout with the Enclave, right? They have their little group and fuck the rest of us, right? That can't stand. That cannot stand. And what they're doing right now with their proxy war against a country that has nuclear weapons, just like they were engaging against the Soviet Union, is unacceptable. And if we don't stand up and stop them, no one will.
And I think that's why you're seeing all these former deep state people, or at least former establishment people like Scott Ritter, Colonel Douglas McGregor, are coming out and being like, look, a small group of psychotic neocons are running the show in both parties and in Washington. And they serve the military industrial complex, all those companies that Daniel Ellsberg was listing there. And now you have like Scott Ritter saying that the communists are becoming his favorite, or like becoming his friends, even though he wasn't a communist his whole life, because people are realizing that reality is Marxist, for lack of a better word. That the imperialists will do anything to hold on to their power and to keep Western dominated, finance capital dominated global capitalism as the main mode of production, even to the point where they're literally making plans for massacre, for nuclear war against the people, just to stop class struggle, essentially. And I mean, we're the only country to ever use nuclear weapons. What everybody knows, we didn't need to drop those bombs on Japan. Everybody except for the people with their heads in the sand. They know that Japan was going to surrender already. It was a threat to the Soviet Union. Don't mess with us. We're willing to literally drop nuclear weapons on you to stop the spread of communism. Or we're willing to kill 20% of the population of Korea. 10% of the population of Laos was killed by the bombing campaigns. It's mass murder that these people are willing to do to maintain their empire. And as Noah said, this shit cannot stand. And honestly, I never run out of motivation, but sometimes doing what we do gets hard. You get attacked all the time. You have people emailing your job to get you fired. And it's nice to look to someone like Daniel Ellsberg in a video like that, or a figure like Angela Davis when she was facing down the American legal system and being threatened with a life in prison. These figures who came before us, who fought the system, and paid the ultimate price for it in many cases. It gives inspiration, and it reveals how bleak, not how bleak, but how important it is to take out this capitalist imperialist ruling class that wants to push us into nuclear warfare.
Right. And although there's nothing that you can call these people but, devilish, sick, it's, I don't know, you can add any demeaning adjective you want. They're just playing the role that the system forces someone to play. There's no specific characteristic, personalized characteristic that they have that's leading to this. right? It's the role that the system needs someone to play because of how capitalism functions. And the only way to remove that is by taking capital away from its position in command and putting labor in command. And that's all that socialism is, a society where it's actually of, by, and for working people, and not that everything in society, the government, production, civil society, all the institutions, run for the sake of profit and for the sake of accumulating capital in a few hands. So it's much more rational, but it's I we should talk about how crazy these people doing this are, but also realize that they're really just acting in a position that the system needs someone to act in. By the way, I put in the comments two of Ellsberg's recent books from this decade that are very helpful. One of them is Secrets, a memoir of Vietnam, and the Pentagon Papers from 2002, and the other one is The Doomsday Machine: Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner from 2017.
The Doomsday Machine is amazing. But here's what we often get carried away, like sort of focused on a tree and don't remember the forest. All of this happens so a handful of people can accumulate, at this point, bigger numbers on computer screens. Right? That's the bottom line here. And this is why they have to go. There's no other option at this point. So if you've been sitting on the fence and wondering, should I get involved? These organizations don't seem good enough. Join them anyway. Make them good enough. That's what we're doing, right? The organizations we're a part of aren't perfect. They have a lot of problems, but we fight to make them better. And we fight to rebuild and build these things into institutions capable of taking power away from these maniacs. And this is what drives me really crazy about a lot of the middle class sort of left. They don't care. They don't care about this at all, as long as their individual, whatever pet issue they have is, as long as they can shame you or yell at you into agreeing with them on it so they'll shut up, they're fine. We are seriously looking towards nuclear Armageddon right now. And so, like, to bring up Scott Ritter, right? He's fighting against this. I don't care what his other opinions are, right? This makes him materially part of the progressive forces. And if you're going to sit here and say, oh, he doesn't have the right opinion on issue A or issue B, I don't give a fuck, okay? I don't. He's with us because he's against them. That's where we're at, right? We are at the point where the working class needs to get our shit together. And I'm so goddamn sick of us sitting back just waiting for someone else to do it. We got to do it, guys. Ain't nobody else doing it.
Absolutely. That's a good transition into, because we're hitting the 1 hour and a half mark, and we have a couple more subjects to go to. But this is a speech from the General Secretary of the World Federation of Trade Unions. His name is Pambis Kyritsis. Might be, I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, but it's a powerful speech and it was just posted today. It's from 10 hours ago, on the interconnection of the global struggle of labor and the struggle against imperialism. So let's listen up.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Mr. Kyritsis, General Secretary, World Federation of Trade Unions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Workers' representatives, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, from this global podium, I would like to salute the militant struggles and the outbursts of millions of workers all over the world who refuse to foot the bill for the capitalist crisis. A crisis which is increasingly generalized and deeper. World peace is dangerously threatened, not for the human rights, as some would have us believe, but because of imperialistic, geopolitical, and economic interests. That's why, for us, struggle for peace means struggle against imperialist interventions, for the dismantling of NATO and all military coalitions. The high inflation, brutally undermining workers' living standards. Social inequalities are widening dramatically. The right to organize and collective bargaining is under attack. The pandemic has been used to launch new attacks on democratic and trade union freedoms. Individual contracts, privatizations, outsourcing, teleworking, and service leasing are just some of the forms taken by this harsh neoliberal attack. We have carefully read the Director General's report. Unfortunately, we see once again that as the attack on social and workers' rights intensifies, instead of measures, proclamations and slogans multiply. For work to be dignified, it must be accompanied by rights. It must guarantee the satisfaction of workers' contemporary needs. Slogans are not enough. The same applies to the report of the occupied Arab territories. The findings, violation of Palestine's national, political, social and workers' rights, black labor, colonization. But what is the reaction? What is the intervention? And above all, what are the measures? WFTU denounces the imperialist policy of double standards and selective sanctions and economic wars, denounces the blockade of Cuba. For some countries, violations are deliberately uncovered in order to impose draconian sanctions. For others, like Israel, international organizations remain silent or limit themselves to reports and findings. I'm coming now to another issue that concerns pluralism and the democratic functioning of the ILO itself. I speak on behalf of over 105 million members from 133 countries on every continent, whose voice is limited and marginalized by the undemocratic way of functioning of the ILO, and also because of the policy of arbitrary exclusions that many states apply. Chile, for example, for the second year in a row, there is not enough time to mention all the complaints, but as a rule, the exclusions concern WFTU affiliates. It is not and never will be acceptable for some to monopolize workers' representation without being entitled. More than any other institution, ILO should become pluralistic and representative. Mr. Chairman, I'm concluding my speech as the General Secretary of the oldest and most historic World Trade Union Federation with a call to the workers. The system that generates crisis and reproduces exploitation can be defeated. United and organized in our class-oriented unions, let us intensify our struggles for a world free of wars and imperialist interventions, free of exploitation and discrimination, where work will be permanent and stable, regulated and safe. Thank you very much.
I wish I had my stream deck so I could play the applause for that guy. That was fantastic.
It was amazing. I'm inspired, right? I'm like, I want to get out there and do some shit, you know?
Shout out to our comrade, the French communist who sent us that to react to today. What a terrific speech. You could play that to the American working class and everyone would agree 100% with everything he's saying. You know, we got $1 billion that have been spent in the last 2 decades on trying to overthrow the Cuban government. That's $1 billion in taxpayer money spent on a effort that will not win. That all it's causing is our fellow working class brothers and sisters in Cuba to live worse lives. You know, we have more in common with working people from around the world than we'll ever have with American capitalists, American bankers, and American politicians. And I think this, he represents 150 million workers. That's a whole lot of workers, and he represents, one of the most radical socialist trade union global federations, and he's calling out the International Labor Organization right to their face for not taking these positions that are in the interest of labor. And it's not like anti-imperialism is this other separate thing. No, anti-imperialism is a fundamental position for the class struggle. If you are on the side of labor, you are on the side of anti-imperialism. And that's what, this idea that somehow you can divide what Biden does internationally from his national politics that some self-proclaimed communists try to do in historical organizations that should know better. It's absurd. The interests of the working class at home is conjoined with the interests of workers around the world in overthrowing imperialism. And if the candidate that you're pushing forward is proliferating imperialism, especially doing it through giving more than 150 billion to Nazis that are waging a proxy war against Russia, there's no way that's good, not just for workers abroad, but for workers at home.
I think it's good, too, that he's criticizing the International Labor Organization, which, as Carlos said, is an agency that's part of the United Nations, which was set up with a lot of good intentions. There was a lot of corporate guidance and bourgeois guidance in the setting up of the UN and the writing of this bourgeois international law. But a lot of people like the idea of the United Nations, of this, international body that governs international affairs, make sure that countries aren't just going to war to fight over colonies like in World War I. But it's been entirely co-opted by neoliberalism. The UN has taken a totally neoliberal form as it's been crafted by the capitalist ruling class. So for this guy to come out, someone who represents all these workers, and say, look, the International Labor Organization doesn't represent us at all. And to criticize that in the open is good. I know that's something that Vijay Prashad likes to hammer, is the good intentions of the UN, or the good ideas behind it. So I like that he's calling out that hypocrisy specifically. The UN, in our first Journal of American Socialist Studies, the UN was actually one of the toolboxes of imperialism that I listed, even though it's supposed to be an organization that prevents imperialist aggression and wars. So great to see him calling out that too. And it means so much because he represents so many workers who the empire's labor is dependent upon. And yeah, very cool video.
Yeah. I really just want to hammer home the shared interests of working class people here and working class people in every other country. Think about the what was it, $2 billion you said spent on trying to destroy Cuba? What if that money were spent to alleviate poverty here? Right? What if it were spent just to decrease, to pay off whatever it takes to decrease the price of food? There are a million different ways that could help American working class people. And it would at the same time help the Cuban working class people. And it's not even just that $2 billion, all of that money spent on every bomb, on the proxy war against Russia, right? Money spent, even just someone in the chat mentioned, even just the taxes that the elites don't pay, right? All of this could turn this country around. And it's not like they don't know they can do this. They know perfectly well they can. But the problem is, it will change the system. It will change it entirely. They will no longer be the elites, right? That requires us to force it to change. And I don't want to get on another rant, but it's time, everyone. It's I'm swearing a lot. It's time.
It absolutely is, especially if you look at the very moderate reforms that some of the social democrats are asking for, that are, in terms of policies, just, extremely popular policies like Medicare for all. The vast majority of the American people support it. You can't have that reform unless you have a more radical transformation of the American system, just because of the trillions of dollars that are in the medical, pharmaceutical, industrial complex, and the billions and billions of dollars that are spent influencing the political system, influencing the media, and influencing all aspects of American society. So, even in areas where people just want something that seems very, very rational, a very small reform, it's the way to achieve even those small, seemingly close reforms. There's no way around it than through a radical transformation of the system, because of the role that big business and monopolies in that area play in influencing all aspects of American society.
Well said, brother. Very well said. With that, do we want to move on to the next topic?
Yes. So the next topic is one that we've touched on before, but it's the topic specifically of how Boris Johnson and Ukraine pulled back from a peace treaty that was actually signed and done in 2022. Let me see if I could pull this up. Russian President Vladimir Putin, and this is, by the way, from Orinoco Tribune, and I'll have some comments that are some from RT and some from the No Cold War website. But Russian President Vladimir Putin revealed during an African leaders meeting in St. Petersburg that Russian forces had withdrawn from Kiev and other regions of Ukraine last year in compliance with a peace agreement reached in Turkey as a part of a African mediation mission to Russia. Part of the peace agreement, which was called the Treaty of Permanent Neutrality and Security Guarantees for Ukraine, stipulated that Ukraine must enshrine a permanent neutrality in its constitution. Russia, the US, Britain, China, and France were all listed as guarantors. And as an addendum to the draft, Putin goes on to show in this meeting, there were also outlines both from Russian and Ukrainian proposals regarding the size of Ukraine's standing army during peacetime, as well as its equipment. And it gets into the details of the specific equipment and how much Russia would have liked it to be in Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. But it was a very thought out deal that had as guarantors the great powers, some of the great powers being imperialist, some not, but the great powers that are shaping global politics. And it not only was signed and agreed upon, but it was a peace treaty that had already begun. Putin had withdrawn forces from Kiev and other parts of Ukraine. And after he did that, you have the breaking of this treaty by Ukraine, and coincides, of course, with the visit of Boris Johnson to Ukraine, that most people agreed, even in regular bourgeois media, that Boris Johnson's visit was a central component in preventing that. For instance, in foreign affairs, they attested to Johnson's efforts to thwart the deal for the two reasons. The first being that it's not possible to negotiate with Putin. Again, the pariah principle. Putin is the devil. You can't negotiate with the devil. The second is that the West is not prepared for an end to the war.
Can I interrupt real quick, Carlos?
Yeah, please do. Please do.
If it's not possible to negotiate with Putin, how did they just negotiate with Putin?
Right. It's the opposite, right? It's not possible for negotiation to be done with the West, because every time there's a fucking negotiation, they break it. Every time,
Right.
whether it's the Minsk Accords or this, every time there's a Minsk a negotiation for peace, it is broken by the West and Ukraine.
And then they're posing as heroes for freedom. And the argument they make is, well, we're not going to capitulate to Putin and hand over Crimea and the Donbass to Russia or give them the independence that they voted for. Like, This is delusional. Delusional, as we learned from Dan Kovalek, Crimea hasn't wanted to be part of Ukraine since the 90s, the early 90s. And all of a sudden you expect them to just join Ukraine and Russia to give up everything that they started the whole war for. It's absurd, and this is from a strategic perspective. In war, you make concessions, right? Mm-hmm. This is how it works historically, regardless of, your exact opinions on the conflict. If you want people to stop dying and you want the war to end, you have to realize there's no chance at this point that Ukraine's getting the Donbass and Crimea back, right? So we have to look for a peace agreement. And the reports from a lot of people that I listen to are saying that Russia's still willing to leave Zelensky in power, right? They're not the peace agreement that was being signed would have not involved regime change. It would have involved the Donbass countries that voted for their independence and voted to join Russia, becoming part of Russia, and same with Crimea. And then the bloodshed could stop. But of course, for the West, it's all about weakening Russia as much as possible, waging a proxy war against Russia where we don't have to use our own troops, where we can use the Ukrainian people as a proxy. So we're pushing them at gunpoint into the Russian meat grinder and then pretending like we're heroes fighting for this country's freedom. It's the sickest shit. And it's being propagated by our ruling class and the corporate media. There's not a single voice in the media critical of this. And if you are critical of it, like Tucker Carlson started to get, you can kiss your nice cable news show goodbye.
And the worst thing about it at this point is that Ukraine wanted this peace deal. And who is the UK and US to tell them, no, why are we even there? Right? This has nothing to do with the UK people or the American people, right? That shows you the interests of the ruling class, right? Ain't about us, ain't about those British people. It's about that money, right? Always about that money. And it's about weakening Russia because Russia is an economic competitor. It always comes back, like we said before, to capital accumulation, to changing and growing those numbers on their computer screens.
Yeah, and that's so true, because today it ends up just being, just because of how large, it ends up just being numbers in a computer screen. And of course it has material effects, like you do stuff with those numbers, but it's so disconnected from anything that has to do with the life world, even of those very billionaires that are involved in making these decisions, or that influence the people that end up making these decisions. But according to Responsible Statescraft, Saturday's release of this document cast doubt on Ukraine's narrative regarding Russia's defeat in the Battle of Kiev in the spring of last year and its withdrawal from the surrounding area. And here RT gives a good point. The negotiations effectively broke down in spring of 2022, shortly after Ukrainian officials accused Russian troops of killing civilians in several small cities around Kiev. The allegations were made immediately after Russian soldiers had withdrawn from the areas outside the Ukrainian capital in what the Kremlin described as at the time as a goodwill gesture. Moscow has since repeatedly denied committing atrocities in Ukraine, as the Kiev regime paints it. Speaking this Saturday, Putin said that Ukraine was responsible for sabotaging the negotiations. He said, quote, "After we pulled our troops away from Kiev, as we had promised to do, the Kiev authorities tossed their commitments into the dustbin of history," he said. "They abandoned everything." He continues then by saying that, "Where are the guarantees?" And this is a reply that he makes in general to this African leadership forum that was done in Moscow. "Where are the guarantees that they will not walk away from agreements in the future?" Putin said, even under such conditions, however, even under such conditions, we have never refused to conduct negotiations. So again, like this narrative that Putin is this irrational actor, or the pariah principle that we saw at play with Boris Johnson. We can't negotiate with Putin because he's the devil. It's almost like the opposite is true. Like how can how can negotiations be done? If you're Russia, how can negotiations be done with a party that has repeatedly broken any commitment to a negotiation that it's established for the last, at least 8 years since, now it's been so at least 10 years since the 2014 coup and the establishment of the Minsk agreements afterwards. But, a party that has been breaking promises for a much, much longer time, of course, is the promise to not move an inch eastward that was promised to Gorbachev. And, constant promises that are made in negotiations that are achieved and then that are just broken at the whim of the West, and in this case, the West and its puppet, Ukraine.
Yeah, there's no way to do that, right? There is no way. And it's just as countries all around the world are learning about getting in business and trading in dollars with the US, right? If you're holding US dollars, our ruling class has shown they have no problem just taking all of it from you,
Mm-hmm.
as they've done time after time to Russia, to Iran, Venezuela, etc., etc., etc. It's absolutely absurd. And it reminds me of how they've always acted this way, right? Same way they acted with the Soviet Union during arms de-escalation talks. Everything was, we can't negotiate with those communists, right? But every time the communists came to the table with drawn up agreements saying, okay, we're ready to sacrifice this if you can do that, they would say no. They would come with unreasonable demands. And then when the Soviets would say, these are unreasonable, they would act as if the Soviets refused to negotiate, right? Mm-hmm. And then when they caved to unreasonable demands, they were weak and they had them on the run, right? It's always this media spin. It's absolutely disgusting.
And what happens when you do negotiate? What happens when you do accept what the West says? What happened to Gaddafi when he gave up his nuclear weapons program? You get a bayonet in the butt and your country collapses. It's not actual negotiations. It's imperialist negotiations. It's give us your entire economy and your entire political system or else. That's not a freaking negotiation. That's a bully tactic. I mean, and I always say this, if you look at geopolitics as if the countries were people interacting with each other, the U.S. is just a big bully. Give us everything we want. No, we're not going to give you absolutely everything you want. Well, you're refusing to negotiate with us. It's how a narcissistic bully acts.
Yeah, and here's the thing. It is on us to deal with this.
Yeah.
We hear from left people all the time, that, there's nothing we can do. Oh, blah, blah, blah. No, that is so ridiculous. We are the only people in the world who can do something about it. And if you're too afraid to do that, that's fine. Just support us as we do, because I guarantee you this fight is going to intensify over the coming years. And I want to be right there on the right side of history.
Absolutely. Let me see. I have a couple comments. I mean, part of what this underscores is the fact that Ukraine is not a sovereign entity. It's really what we've been saying from the beginning. It's really a pawn in the U.S. and the West, NATO's proxy war against Russia, and it's a war where Ukrainian people are just treated as cannon fodder. And it's very sad the position that the Ukrainian elite and their political class have put the Ukrainian people in. We should criticize the rise of fascism within it, but it's still very sad what's happening to their people. And I can't imagine them agreeing with that much longer. But here's an interesting statement, and this comes from Dave DeCamp's article in antiwar.com. He said that after peace talks were scuttled in April 2022, the Turkish foreign minister Mevlut Cavusoglu said that he expected the conflict to end after the Istanbul talks, but then realized some countries in NATO wanted to prolong the war to weaken Russia. A few days after his comments, the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, admitted that one of the U.S.'s goals in supporting Ukraine was to, quote, weaken Russia, to see Russia weakened. As the war dragged on, the Biden administration would come out and explicitly say over and over again that they were against ceasefire. And the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, outlined the position earlier this month, saying that they would continue building up Ukraine's military rather than to push for peace. And what are the Ukrainians asking for at the moment? Well, Zelensky has reiterated that Kiev's position in these negotiations can only commence when Moscow surrenders Crimea, which voted to join Russia overwhelmingly, of course, in 2014. And along with Crimea, 4 other regions, specifically in the Donbass, a similar procedure happened through referendum in September 2022. Putin argued that on Saturday that these acquisitions of territories by Russia was, quote, flawless in terms of international law and the UN Charter. He added that Moscow had the right to intervene in order to protect the people of Donbass who opposed the 2014 coup in Kiev. Ukraine dropped all discussions about a possible neutrality last year and has since formally applied to NATO. So, very scary global situation that we're in. Neither the elites on the US and NATO side, nor the Ukrainian political class, which is a puppet of those elites, none of those sides really want peace. And, it's, as we've said it many times, it's tiptoeing humanity towards nuclear Armageddon. Is a situation where no one really wins.
Yeah, it's scary, it really is.
It is. And like the number one, if you look at the global situation and the way that the West is acting, like the rise of multipolarity is great and BRICS is great. But as Vijay Prashad is always saying, like BRICS isn't enough to topple the empire. What we need is revolution in the U.S., right? And any leftist who's telling you that revolution in the U.S. is impossible because we're all a bunch of settlers is lying to you. And what would help, the colonized peoples of the world more than anything else is a revolution here in the U.S. for the American workers of every color, every creed, every belief system, every ethnicity to band together and overthrow the neocons who are running the show. It's literally people like John Bolton running the show. In the early 2000s, John Bolton wrote the doctrine of the neoconservatives, basically saying that U.S. interests should be held in higher regard than international law. We should be able to ignore international law as long as it furthers our interests, which the logical conclusion of that is pushing us all the way to World War III, right? Because our interests are more important than international law. We'll poke and prod and attack a nuclear power until they're forced to react. So now we have neoconservatives running the show in both parties, or call them neoliberals, whatever you want. But Biden and his officials and Victoria Nuland are running the show. And it's even getting worse. The Duran was reporting the other day that there are people within the Pentagon who are worried about this. Like I said earlier about Colonel Douglas McGregor and Scott Ritter, there are more people who have been part of the establishment coming out and saying this is absurd. These neocons are pushing us to a nuclear war. Those people are being systematically fired and systematically pushed out of the Pentagon and pushed away from Biden and where they can influence him. Meanwhile, there's rumors that Victoria Nuland has a big promotion coming up, right? And there's promotions for these psychotic neoconservatives who are pushing us towards World War III with Russia. So the military-industrial complex is tightening its grip on the state, the deep state, and the regular state. And the only solution to this is proletarian revolution. That's what we need. And, it might come to the point where they're trying to send us to World War III. And this is why it's important to recruit military members. I know, people have their ethical and moral critiques of the U.S. military, but if the Bolsheviks didn't recruit military people, the revolution wouldn't have been successful. And American soldiers who signed up for the military for free college or because they didn't know what to do out of high school don't want to go fight a war with Russia. They don't want to go fight another nuclear power. They want healthcare and a job and a stability here at home. So talk to those people, talk to everyone, tell them what's going on. Like the truth will win out. There's the reason they're so desperate to push censorship and combat misinformation is because we're getting the truth out there and they can't stop it anymore. Right. So talk to your family, talk to your friends, make content or whatever you have to do to get the word out there. Talk to your coworkers. Let's get organized and overthrow these imperialist fucks.
And that's the paradox of the pessimism on the left. We might not believe in ourselves and in our potential, but the ruling class does. That's why they spend so much in resources, financial resources, institutions, etc., in ensuring that we are fed lies and believe those lies, and in ensuring that when we think about, anti-capitalist struggles, we go down the route of the compatible left, of the, controlled agents of counter-hegemony, of the radical recuperators, and not down the route that substantially opposes imperialism.
I don't see how the purity fetish left even pictures a revolution happening, right? They can't. What, do you really think a handful of college kids who know nothing about how to organize a small protest are going to overthrow the capitalist class of the United States of America? The very idea of that is absurd. I will take one Scott Ritter over 5,000 of them any day of the week. Scott Ritter knows the ins and outs of their system. He's actually fighting for what he believes in, right? And as Eddie said, he's saying the communists are becoming his best friends now. Do you really think that can't happen for McGregor, for everyone getting fired from the Pentagon who knows the truth and can help us? Put away your fucking purity fetish because we got shit to do here. This is serious. If you're not going to be serious about overthrowing the capitalist class, that's fine. Sit at home and support us as we do it because we are getting organized right now. We want you to come with us. We want there to be a giant march down Pennsylvania Avenue of all of us saying, we can't take it no more. You guys are done. But if you want to stay at home and say, it's not happening, I don't see it, then do that instead. Just get the fuck out of our way.
And then you have these commentators and pundits like the Vanguard account. They're calling themselves the freaking Vanguard. And they're attacking Aaron Mate for doing an interview with Colonel Douglas McGregor. Because, he's a bad guy. And it's one of the most ridiculous interviews I've ever seen. They had Aaron Mate on their show to debate this. And he's just explaining, why would we not learn from somebody who knows the ins and outs of the imperialist system, who's willing to tell us about it? You would have to be so freaking stupid strategically. But they're not even thinking strategically. They're all thinking idealistically. They're all thinking in terms of morality. These people are immoral. They're the bad guys. They're the ones I don't like. They're off limits to talk to. And then the people in my upper middle class, professional managerial class, social group, those are the good guys. The people who have all the same social policies and all the same positions in the culture war that I do. That's how they see politics. And they don't think of revolution in terms of strategy. I saw one of the most insufferable ultra accounts on Twitter recently. They might as well be a Fed. I'm not going to say their name because I don't want to give them any attention or platform them. But they were saying that they were critiquing the Black Panthers for not being enough in favor of land back. And they were attacking the Rainbow Coalition, for not just being focused on full decolonization, as they put it, full shipping of white people out of the country or whatever. And it's how in the hell do you think your idealist political imaginary world is going to come about in reality, right? If you can't work with anyone, if you're critiquing the Black Panthers as being right-wing reactionaries because they're not ultra-left enough and not decolonial enough or whatever, how are you going to convince everyone to go along with this, or a substantial amount of people to go along with this? They're not thinking about reality. They're thinking idealistically, and they're thinking in terms of morality. How far left can I go morally? How can I make my position seem the most left wing, the most progressive? We're going to ship all the white people are so bad, we're going to ship them all out of the United States. Like, it's not realistic in any way, but that just shows they're not thinking strategically. They're not thinking, how do we make the world a better freaking place? They're thinking, how do I appear as the most moral in my online Radlib social group?
This is exactly what Marx and Engels criticized the utopians for, right? And we just went over anti-Düring in Marxism school, in the Basics of Marxism course. Engels explains in that why the utopians failed, right? Because they weren't looking at how the base of society actually functions and the relations that creates in the real world. They're all tied together, right? One produces the other, produces a change, produces the next other, on and on and on and on. That is scientific socialism. So it really gets me it grinds my gear when these people claim to be Marxists, because they're nothing but left utopians pretending and using our symbols, right? And when you're not in favor of whatever hip bourgeois theory they love this week, they call you a fascist and pandering to conservatives. We are pandering to the working class, who, guess what, hate you guys and consider you pampered college kids, because that's what you are.
Absolutely. These people are not concerned with change, and we have to stop acting like they are. We have to stop acting like as soon as someone begins to identify as something that they're that. They can call themselves Marx all they want, or Marxist, or Marxist-Leninist. They can put Sankara pictures on their profile. They can put Stalin pictures on their profile. They can put the hammer and sickle on their profile. They can do all of that. Just because they identify as it doesn't mean they're actually that. It doesn't mean they're actually Marxists. Not you don't become a communist when you begin calling yourself a communist. You have to, have certain principles, a certain outlook, a certain engagement with the masses. So it's not even about being right. It's about being with the masses and working with the masses. You earn the title communist. You don't get it as soon as you identify as a communist. And in our very identitarian left and culture, that's something that people ignore. But these people are concerned with having as pure ideas as possible. And when they think in terms of groups, they're concerned with having the groups with shaping groups that have the purest idea possible. What there really is not a Marxist left or a social, they're the monastery left. They are a monastery left. They want a small clique of enlightened PMC leftists who have the purest ideas, the most ultra left ideas as possible. And that's it. They don't want anything to do with working people. They don't want anything to do with any struggle that even they claim to be against. Because, they have this romanticized image of what the struggle of indigenous people is like. Like, the vast majority of them have been proletarianized. Their struggle is our struggle. We have a shared struggle. And I'm sorry, but I align myself with the sort of theory that's not like, let's just tribalize everyone and divide them. I align myself with the sort of theory that looks at the commonality and struggles that different people have, that doesn't lose the sight of difference, but that sees what's common in all of us as human beings and as working people, that we all share a common interest. And I see their struggle as my struggle and vice versa. So these identitarians they're working with the same logic, with the same world outlook, with the same philosophical assumptions as a lot of the racists did, which is a deeply ingrained essentialist tribalism. And we have to reject that because it's actually a reactionary mode of thought that's passing itself off as progressive. Don't be confused by it. It's reactionary through and through.
Yeah, absolutely. I almost don't have anything to add to that. That was perfect. We did get a super chat. Lemonheads, thank you so much.
Thank
Consistent
you.
supporter of the show. Please watch Dylan Burns interview Right Sector. I looked that up while we were talking here, and it is a real thing. I guess Dylan Burns really sat down with Right Sector, and I'm sure, gave them softball questions and gave them a softball interview that let them downplay their Nazi tendencies. So at some point, we can definitely react to that.
We're doing a stream Friday. We could add it to the reaction. Send it to us through Discord. so that we
Yes.
can add it to the reaction list. I had one more thing that's like 20 seconds that I wanted us to react to, but no, it looks like you have a comment.
Yeah. Before that, I would love to be in the room just listening to Dylan Burns talking to Right Sector. Like before that happens, where he's like, look. All the people I'm talking to think they're the left. Okay? You can't talk about Heiling Hitler right now. Please don't. Can you take off the Nazi patches, all that? Because the tankies are going to make fun of me, right? You know that conversation happened. You know it happened.
That's like the video we watched the other day. It was a New York Times video about the Azov camps for kids when mainstream media was still willing to talk about that. And they're like marching around with Nazi patches, instructing the kids, having young children do military drills. And then at the very end, they interview a couple of them and they're like, no, we're not Nazis. The people with Nazi patches, they just wear those for fun. Like just to give themselves a cop out. They were, instructed to say that by whoever. Maybe, they understand the politics in America and they know how to make themselves look good or how to sort of whitewash their Nazism. But it's so like pathetic and easy to see through.
Dude, I have never in my life worn a Nazi patch for fun.
Right?
Shits and giggles.
Like, I have plenty of fun, don't get me wrong. Never worn a Nazi patch to do that, right? You have to buy the Nazi patch, first of all. You have to put it on, sew it on, whatever you're doing. You don't do that. It's like that time Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker interviewed all these Ukrainian soldiers. There's one that's sitting literally with a red and black blood and soil flag right there, and a big old what's that one called with the like circle thing going around and around?
Is that the rune, the Nordic rune?
It might be. I forget the name of it. It's the one. It looks like little like hockey sticks going around in a circle. But yeah, just mind numbing. Like and here's the thing: the media thinks we're stupid, right? I'm not stupid. Y'all aren't stupid. We need to take that fight to them, as has been the sort of theme throughout the night. It's time. It's time.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Andrew, for the $10 super chat. Big time there. Purity Lips forget if their identity is tied to the idea of being an enlightened clique, then going to the people and becoming popular becomes a failure condition to them. Absolutely. Real socialism, real revolution might eliminate their class position, might eliminate their ability to be condescending towards workers. So then they're actually against the real revolution, against the real movement of history, in favor of their purist, idealist ideas that are just based on being as aesthetically left wing as possible.
And I have a section on that in the book, and it's the one that I've talked about the least, but it's, what ends up happening when socialism for you is an identity, when being a socialist is fundamentally about being this fringe countercultural group within capitalist imperialism, actually winning the struggle for the political conquest by the working class means you lose your identity as a fringe countercultural socialist. So like the achievement of socialism and winning political power, to them it's tied with the loss of selfhood, because socialism is so identitarian in their eyes. It's tied to their profile and their profile curation as a countercultural socialist, that actually winning socialism means the death of their identity. And that's, the way that these paradoxes arise today. And we have to move away from that, right? I have a few accounts, and none of my accounts do I have, a little hammer and sickle on on my bio, or I have a Che quote on my Facebook one, but I try to stay off social media just so that I don't get in trouble. That's the honest truth. People tell me to get Twitter. I don't want to get canceled. I'll get canceled as soon as I have a few drinks on a Thursday and tweet some dumb shit.
All right.
But
Well, what do you
yeah,
think, boys? Do you want to do that last little thing?
yes, it's just a 20-second clip from the Deep Program podcast, which if I'm correct, it's Hakeem, um,
Oh, JT's. Yeah,
JT,
yeah, yeah.
JT, and
You got me.
Ugopnik, the Balkan wonderful voice, fellow alcoholic, solidarity. But I think there's a few things to sort of decode with this clip, and I think it might be interesting to do so as a final segment. But.
You will be brainwashed. Me, America's son. Ha! That will be a challenge. You bet. Our enemies are all those in league with imperialism. The bureaucrats, the big landlord class, and the reactionary section of the intelligentsia attached to them. You will...
I thought that was hilarious. I don't know what movie that's from, but
That was John Candy, right? Is that from Stripe or Striped?
Stripes was Bill Murray, wasn't it?
I think John Candy's in Striped.
I don't
I'm
know.
almost positive.
You could be right. I vaguely remember that. I was thinking maybe Canadian. No, it's not Canadian bacon.
Well, here's the thing. It shows and that brainwash terminology. It's used by Mao. Like radicalization is a process of brainwashing. You're doing away with the old ideology that makes you see things upside down and incorrectly, and inputting a cleaner outlook that actually allows you to see truth. It's sort of the lingo. That's why it's not understood in the derogatory sense that we take it to be like today. But the American was brainwashed in the sense that his outlook transformed. He became a Marxist-Leninist and now has a more correct view of the world and of his interest as a regular working-class American. What I kind of get pissed off at is the beginning image of the American before they are transformed. It's like this archetypical super patriot. And I think that while that might have been true some decades ago, today that super patriotism is not very big. Even the people that were super patriots and that are still culturally embedded in some of that super patriotism, they seem to be the ones that are the most skeptical of what they call the deep state and of war and all these other things, and who understand that the way things are and the ruling elite, which they don't tie to a capitalist class, they tie to like globalists and things, but not yet, right? Yeah, not yet, but they have a quite advanced social consciousness, a very anti-elitist, anti the existing system social consciousness. So yeah, that's the only problem that I saw with it, but it's fairly good. It shows that at least the American people can change in terms of image.
Yeah, I mean,
cameo for my parents there.
Hi, Eddie's mom. Here's the thing. I think you're spot on about everything you just said, brother. I think that we're getting to this point where we're going to see that change that happened, where the people, their love of their country, their culture, their communities, their whatever else was used by the ruling class, right? And pushed in a certain direction. But we're getting to this point where that's no longer able to happen. You notice it's more dissonant energy. And yes, it's still being used by the ruling class in certain ways. But what happens when we step in there and we go, you know what? In order to really love your country, why wouldn't you want to fulfill the promises made to us in 1776 of a government of, by, and for the people, right? Why, if you love your country, why would you want our people to go die in other wars? Why would you want them to take our money and spend it on all of this other stuff while we suffer? And so I think it's the right time to do that, Again, it's just the
Absolutely.
right time. It's time.
It's common sense to most people. Most people see that we spent so much money on the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Ukraine, while everything's crumbling at home. The trains are derailing at home. And, we just have to hammer the common sense issues. We have to hammer these things that make sense to everybody, like anti-imperialism and, pro-working class policies, rebuilding the infrastructure, healthcare. Like, it's been really interesting this week since my mom just walked in and made me think of this. Like, spending the week with my parents and family and friends and extended family. At the same time that leftists on Twitter are having discourse about abolish the family, hashtag abolish the family. And it's just so stupid and so disconnected from reality, the debates that leftists are having versus, talking to my family about the war in Ukraine and, doing things for workers and higher wages. They're all on board. We talked to my cousin. She was or my cousin's wife just quit her job at a coffee shop because she was making tiny or incredibly low wages while inflation continues to rise, and basically got her to embrace a socialist position just by talking about that, by talking about the things going on in her life. Meanwhile, the left on Twitter is screaming about abolish the family. Like, if we have a focused, class-based, anti-imperialist-based movement, we're going to win people over in it's only a matter of time. Like, this is common sense to the vast majority of America at this point. As I said, the people running the show are the neocons, like even small business owners and the petty bourgeoisie. Their interests are not in line with these people in any way, shape, or form. So the American people are ready, as Noah said a lot this stream. We just have to have a message that they are drawn to.
There was a
Abolish the
time.
family is an objectively stupid slogan. It's just stupid. You're never. Do you really try saying that to a coworker? Go up to him and go, "Let's abolish the family." And then when you say that, they're like, "But Engels said," and you're like, "No, he didn't." No. Do you think Engels wanted to ad hoc start voluntarily abolishing things? Engels knew that wasn't how things work. And if you use a little common sense, you'll see that too.
Right, and it's the opposite of their whole like very middle class spirit and approach to like sexual relations, because like the conclusion of the origins is that, well, you had polygamy, then you have a, thanks to patriarchy, this long period where there's supposed to be monogamy, but it's really polygamy for the men. They can go around and cheat however much they want, but because of their position of power within the family, the woman is forced into monogamy, the man can sleep with as many people as they want. And then socialism, the sublation of that, the overcoming of that would be a condition where there's actual monogamy and familiar relations that are based on love, right? Which today you can be more open-minded and add different forms of familial relations, gay familiar relations, and etc. It doesn't have to be exclusive to straight families, but it's families that are based on love, not on the family being an economic unit, not on the family being this polygamous, everyone can just do whatever they want and break this sort of bond of loyalty to your partner. That was the idea. You can disagree with it, but what some people were doing, which is criticizing Eddie's thing and then appealing to Engels, it's like, buddy, you did not read the text, and it's pretty obvious. And it's not that we want to treat these texts in a doctrinaire manner, but if people are going to appeal to them and then do it wrongly, you have to call that out. You can tell that they didn't read. And just the idea, again, we go back to the monastery left. Like, it sounds pure for them, the idea of having within the repertoire of what you're asking for the abolishment of the family. And if working class people don't want to agree with that, then fuck them. At least my little insular group of monastery leftists will agree with it. And that's what they're concerned with. They're not concerned with, just like, there was I'm of course an immigrant. I was born in Cuba. I came here when I was little, and I've lived the sort of life that a chunk of immigrant American people are able to live. And there was a time where, telling people like me that they couldn't feel American was like an extremely reactionary thing to do. It was only the far right who would tell immigrants, "You're not American. You can't feel American. If you feel any pride in any part of the past or your country, you can't do it. It's just impossible. And now it's the left. Now it's literally the left that says you can't have any pride in any part of the past of your country. So if I align myself with the traditions of Frederick Douglass, of W.B. Du Bois, of Henry Winston, of Martin Luther King, of James Baldwin, of a part of Lincoln, the part of Lincoln that developed to the end, and a part of the original revolutionary tradition, which set the grounds for everything that comes after, as the recently passed historian Stoughton Lynn nicely put it. Like, in many ways, the more progressive side of the 1776 ideals, their practical and logical conclusion is socialism, right? So there's this whole tradition. If I feel pride in that tradition that has been anti-empire, anti-capitalism, anti-racism, anti-slavery, anti-genocide, anti-bigotry, if I feel pride in that tradition, I'm a bigot and a chauvinist. Really? Who talks like that is the people who've always talked like that have been the reactionaries on the right.
The white supremacists.
Alienating. The white supremacists, right? And, it's not without reason that, one of the papers that we've published in favor of like proletarian patriotism, which is really just having a pride in this positive part of the tradition. That's how the paper understood it. It comes from Kayla Papachet, who's a brown woman, a person of color, who's Peruvian, wasn't born here, is a Peruvian immigrant, and people are shitting on her as a white nationalist, a white supremacist, a social chauvinist. What the fuck are you guys talking about? You guys are the ones that are actually that, because you're saying that this person who's an immigrant can't actually feel a certain bond to the positive history of this country. And the people who've always done that have been the reactionary right.
It's literally saying blood and soil. That is what it is saying. The only difference is the opinion they have on it in their head. One says good, the other says bad. But guess where that matters? In their head, not in the real world. In the real world, in the concrete reality, it's the exact same.
So someone actually brought up that article this week, funny enough, to attack us. Someone who's like, they must just sit around and think about Midwestern Marx all day, because all they do is tweet at us. I think I finally blocked them. But anyways, they brought up that article and said it was an article in support of genocide and slavery. And I just took a screen cap from the article where Kayla says the U.S. did begin with genocide and slavery, which is terrible, but we need to sublate the U.S. and move on from that through revolutionary struggle. And that, it doesn't mean that the U.S. always has to be based on genocide and slavery. And it's just hilarious. This Radlib, who was anonymous, but probably a white upper middle class person or a student or an activist, attacking Kayla, distorting her words to try and make her seem like some kind of white supremacist genocide denier. It's just absurd. But, I love that article from Kayla. I think it's a fantastic article. So I just tweeted it out, and because the person was saying, read this article where Midwestern Marx defends genocide. I'm like, yes, please do read the article. Please engage with this article, because it'll change your mind. And Kayla also has been to Venezuela, and she interviewed one of the Chavistas and asked him about patriotism. And the Chavista says, what is left for the Americans other than to pick up their flag and go forward and forge something new, forge something anti-imperialist, forge something socialist, the opposite of what this country has come to represent, which is capitalist imperialism and neoliberalism. So we're being urged by our comrades in Venezuela to take up the flag and go forward towards socialism. And then you have these white student upper middle class radlibs in America being like, no, that's a settler pat sock thing to do. Blah, 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 buzzword, buzzword, buzzword. A lot of these people literally freaking speak in a string of buzzwords. They don't even know how to make a coherent argument.
And just real quick, Noah,
just also did that.
Yeah, just real quick, because that line that they screenshotted, they misrepresented in the tweet that they were describing it. Because what she says is that the U.S. is not reducible to the negative aspect, which is just dialectics. You can't reduce a totality to the bad part. You have to see it in its objective contradictions, and that's what she did. She says, we have this horrible legacy that has been the legacy of the ruling class, it's decaying, and it's got this other legacy at the bottom of it, in the underbelly of it, that has fought against this one, and that's the one that we should appeal to in our patriotism, in our bringing forth of the positives of American history in order to ground our struggles today and give it some historical legs. That's just basic dialectics. It's basic Marxism, Leninism. But because these people do not know anything, they don't know anything. They don't study Marxism, but they call themselves Marxists. They're grounded in middle class communities. They don't actually have any skin in the game, because of those conditions. And these are the accounts that are just boosted by the algorithms. These are the accounts that are boosted by the algorithm. Loves these accounts
And the bots.
and the bots. They love it. They love it.
And that's just it. They are in no way whatsoever Marxist. If you're not looking at every single society as a contradiction with an older, already developed end and a developing end, overcoming that, and the developing end is the decay of the older end, then you're not looking at that society through Marxism, right? And in the US, and even further, Marxists see as definitive of a thing that progressive end. Stalin says that the reason we focus on the proletariat is because it is the developing part of society. It is what is new, overcoming the old, and vital. Therefore, the struggle against slavery, against racism, against the genocides that our ruling class perpetrated is what the U.S. is, because it is the motion. It is what is developing and coming into being, right? And that's everything. And so that is what we are patriotic towards. And I will state every single day, I love my country because of that. I am patriotic because of that, because we are the country that threw down the British colonizer. We are the country that threw down slavery, and we are the country that threw down Jim Crow. I think of that as part of what creates me, because it is, and I am fucking proud of that. And if you have a problem with that, want to call me a settler because of it, guess what? I'm also a second generation immigrant. So fuck you on that end too. It's just all they have is purity after purity after purity. And when you get through one, it goes to the next one. And I just got like real heated on that. And I know we're trying to wind down. So I'll shut up now. But never, ever, ever let someone tell you not to be proud of your country if you're American. Fuck them.
And I spent time in South Dakota this week, where there's a huge indigenous population. And I feel like these white upper middle class radlibs just tokenize the shit out of the indigenous, right? They're not actually concerned with the problems that indigenous people are facing, because they've been reproletarianized. Indigenous people are living under capitalism, right? The indigenous people need jobs and infrastructure and in commerce and the same exact things that everybody needs under capitalism, right? And then these people are like, well, let's just put them on a land plot, and that's the key. That's what we're doing now with the reservations, just putting them on a land plot and saying fend for yourself under capitalism, which isn't going very well, after years of subjugation and genocide and stuff. So what the indigenous people need is socialism for everybody. But these radlibs just like to tokenize the indigenous and use it to appear as the most pure, to the point where they're attacking the Black Panthers and the Rainbow Coalition and, successful efforts for organizing people for socialism, for not being, decolonial enough or whatever.
You know what? Let me butt in real quick. I apologize, but we get these kind of things come up every time you talk about this, because what they're looking for is a reason to cancel you with their purity fetish. Of course, shut up. I'm sorry. I'm just like really pissed off right now.
Right. And I mean, part of the question is like the indigenous people in the U.S. don't live in a void. They exist in relation to every other development, and in the same way that the African people that were enslaved and brought here have been a central component in the development of America as America. And the best parts of what we can describe as America has come from this Black freedom struggle. It's been a process of a people becoming a people, a very diverse people becoming a people. The same thing has happened with the indigenous communities. Like, they have proletarianized, as Eddie mentioned, they have a lot of the same issues and day-to-day concerns as regular, quote unquote, regular proletarians. They are regular proletarians. And, you know, the question would be like, yeah, if they want self-determination, of course, we have a fundamental principle in Marxism-Leninism that's a nation's right to self-determination. The question is, do they want self-determination? Or is that just a projection that's being established by the white middle-class left in order to sound radical? Or by certain intelligentsia elements that also benefit materially from touting these slogans within the academy? Because that exists too. Right, and it exists not just with indigenous, but also with people from the third world who come from. They claim to speak for the people in their countries, and because they have very radical sounding positions, they're plastered all over the more radical sides of the academy.
And the last thing I'll say on this is the place I was at in South Dakota was literally the headquarters of NDN Collective. I saw it. This Amazon-funded NGO that's supposed to help indigenous, that pushes the land back thing really hard. And it's like, there were posters of missing indigenous people all over the city. You know, the rates of indigenous depression, poverty, alcoholism, things like that are really high. So in this place where you have this bourgeois NGO that's supposedly standing up for the indigenous people are suffering greatly, except for the ones who own capital, who are part of the NDN Collective, who are trying to weaponize the indigenous identity for their own market interests, for their own profit interests. I'm sorry, but that's what the NDN Collective is. That's what NGOs are doing, is weaponizing wokeism for capital gains, and it's abandoning the actual indigenous people, right? It's not that we don't care about the indigenous people; it's that we don't just want to tokenize them and use them to try and have the most pure decolonial position. We actually want to help them, right? Which is why we don't buy into what the NDN Collective is selling. This is why we're scientific socialists and not ethno-nationalists who want to create an ethno-state.
Because helping them is at the same time helping us. All of our interests align. We share a common enemy, a common exploiter, right? The reason my family struggles is the same reason theirs struggles. If they could struggle harder in one situation, we could struggle harder in another. We share the same enemy, though. It aligns us. We are natural allies.
Well, yeah, I mean, I thank this person for bringing up the questions, because I'm sure that it's one that some people at least are going to have, and I don't think it's absurd asking it. I also want to mention that, unlike some of the anti-patriotism crowd, we're not going to cancel people for not being patriots. And really, all we mean by patriotism is being able to ground ourselves in the positive history of our country. For me, at least, it's not very much related to the flag. I don't own the flag. I don't think I've ever owned the American flag, or perhaps some clothing with it because of baseball. I played in maybe a team or two that had the flag, but it's not that I'm attached to. I'm attached to the positive history of struggle, the emancipatory movements that have came out of this nation that have a specific character that's common to the struggles of every other nation's working class, but that also has a unique element to it. And, you know, as someone who's, you know, grown up in this culture, I find myself attached to that in similar ways that I do with Cuba. Those are the two nations that I consider myself to be a part of. And yes, I feel very, very happy when I read about the struggles in other countries, but there's just something phenomenologically special about the countries that I consider myself a part of as a Cuban American. And that's really, at least for me, when I talk about patriotism, which I don't bring it up anymore just because of how divisive it's been on the left. Perhaps with regular working people, yes. But when I talk about patriotism, the few times I've talked about it, that's all I mean. Like, tracing back to our roots. And what the fuck is Cornel West doing? Like, his whole campaign is about tracing back to the roots of the best parts of America, which is indigenous people, you know, immigrants, the black struggle, some white people that function as allies in the struggle and the labor movement. Like, you know, we don't make it a requirement to work with other people that they have to accept this legacy. There's projects that we work with on a almost weekly basis that don't see that they don't see America as in the way that we see it, and then don't attach themselves to that history in ways that are similar to us. And we have no problem working with them, none whatsoever. We don't want everyone to be a patriot, but what we find is that a lot of the people, they reject that, but they accept the positive history, which is the reason why we, to some extent, are okay with the concept of regular patriotism, as opposed to what Michael Parenti called super patriotism, working class patriotism, patriotism that's grounded in this history of struggle. You know, comrades like RBN, they're very much grounded in the history of the Black freedom movement and that struggle. We see that struggle as foundational to what America means. And that's why we consider that by aligning ourselves with that struggle, we align ourselves with a certain understanding of this American trajectory of patriotism. In this sense, they don't align themselves with patriotism, but the concept of what they see as their historical past is the same as ours. And so they call it patriotism. They don't call it patriotism. We call it doesn't matter. It's about, like, are you willing to go to the people and the legacy of your people that it is in the common sense of the American folks? Are you willing to go back to MLK, to Malcolm X, to W.B. Du Bois, to Winston, to Frederick Douglass, in using that best part of our tradition and moving forward? And they're willing to do that. We're willing to do that. We call it patriotism. They don't. I don't care. We don't care. We shouldn't care.
Too many people are focused on the labels.
Right. And all it is thinking dialectically. Yep. Right? It's thinking dialectically. It's seeing, that America isn't just one thing, in its totality. There are conflicting things that make up the totality that is America. And RBN sees that. They don't call it patriotism. We don't give a shit. We love RBN. They're our comrades. They're willing to speak to the workers. That's what it is.
Oh, yeah, they're good friends. Some of our best friends in the world. So me personally aren't patriot. It doesn't matter, right? Bird Overlord here, I think, is starting to see where we're coming from then. I think this is a good leading question here. It makes us fucking hate them. I'm swearing so much. I apologize. But yeah,
it's the capitalist states. It's not the people state. It's been the capitalist and the imperialist state through and through. So I don't attach myself to the state. There's elements in it that have, been able to provide seeds for something new, but it's the capitalist state, and it's been a dictatorship of capital through and through, with certain principles that were not lived up to because it's been a dictatorship of capital through and through. And what we want is a dictatorship of the vast majority of the people, a dictatorship of the working class. So it's, these conflations, that's what ends up happening. Like, one person says patriotism, and because the image that it conjures in another person's head is super patriotism and attachment to the state, to the military, to all these, they're like, oh, no, you're a bigot. Yeah, if that's your patriotism, sure. But that's not what we're talking about. And this is a very, very new thing in the left. In the communist left, and in the progressive forces in general, the norm has been to talk in this way. Like, read Du Bois's Black Reconstruction, Sumner, Taylor, like all the leading abolitionist Democrats. They were seeing their project of abolition democracy as being fully in line with the spirit of 1776. They were seeing it as the potential of actually fully realizing the principles from 1776. Okay, so it's been a battle. It's always been a battle of how are these principles going to be read, these principles that are accepted by the vast majority of the American people. Principles which inspired not only the anti-colonial revolution against Britain, but that then went on to inspire the revolution in France, the revolution in Haiti, that has always been read as the first major anti-colonial revolution in this hemisphere. So, Fidel Castro, read Fidel Castro's History Will Absolve Me. Who is he quoting? He's quoting, the legacy of the more progressive parts of the bourgeois tradition. And it starts with the Declaration of Independence and the right to revolution. Who's Ho Chi Minh quoting in the Declaration of Independence of Vietnam? He's quoting our Declaration of Independence, and then the Declaration of Independence, the French one, whatever, I forget the name. So, if communists from around the world have been able to see the progressive kernel in our tradition, and if we have always been able to see it, Why is it that now, after we recognize how much infiltration has gone into the left to divert it from the forms of thought that can unite it with the people in such a important moment as the one that we're in, an objectively revolutionary moment, why is it that now these debates are arising? Why is it that now a big chunk of the left, the one that has a certain institutional grounding in the whatever organizations that we can claim to consider themselves socialists and communists today, why is it that now people are thinking like this? Reflect on that. Why is it that these people, not we, why is it that some of these people are at odds in their thinking with not only every major communist revolutionary, literally in the history of the 20th century, but also with the communist and progressive traditions of their own country? What is progressive about that? And you'll start to see a trend, whether it's in the patriotism question or whatever question it is, you'll see that at its core, what you have in terms of philosophical worldview is a reactionary worldview. And I just explained it. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if someone told me you can't be proud in this American legacy, and I had to guess who it was, I'd say it was a reactionary, a white supremacist. Now it's the standard position in large chunks of the left.
Fantastic. That's gonna make a great clip. Everything we just said in that segment right there, but that was a perfect way to end it and encapsulate everything, every argument we just made. So thank you, Carlos. And please check out Carlos's book, The Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism. It'll help explain all of this stuff from a dialectical perspective, help you better understand dialectics and how to have a measured analysis or a balanced analysis of this country. And it's really fantastic. So available now on MidwesternMarx.com and Patreon.com/MidwesternMarx.
And can I say just a thing real quick?
Of course.
There's a lot of these people that criticize this position. They do it under the veil of criticizing social chauvinism and reactionary tendencies within the left. And it couldn't be more upside down. If you read the key thinkers in the communist movement who have written about fascism, specifically Georgy Dimitrov, if you read Dutt, if you read all the key figures that have written about fascism, if you read the most important anti-fascist leader in human history, whose name is J.V. Stalin, read about their positions concerning how you should treat your national past. National nihilism, this idea that you can just say, no, my past is too impure, I don't want to do it, that is the way for the fascists to take a part of the past that your people accept and to give it a fascist spin. That's what they'll do with Lincoln, they'll do it with Washington, they'll do it with Jefferson, and they have done it. That's what they've done in Germany and Italy, etc., etc. Figures that were ambiguous, that could have been used for progressive ends, were then rearticulated towards reactionary ends. And the way you prevent that is not by saying, here, take them. Take the positive legacy of our country and do what you will with it. No, you do the opposite. You take that positive legacy and you see that the trajectory that it's aiming towards is socialism, a dictatorship of the proletariat, a world without racial hierarchy, bigots, and without oppression, without exploitation, etc., etc., etc. That's what these people have always understood that we've had to do. Stalin, Dimitrov, and what the struggle for socialism has always been is one in which socialism is the content that has to take a specific national form. When we say, no, 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 we're too bad, this is not going to happen here. We have to reject our history, and socialism here is going to take the form of abolish America. What we're doing is a liberal tinted American exceptionalism. We're saying it's worked like this everywhere else in the world, but we, the virtuous Americans, we're the exception. We're the ones who can have an abstract socialism that's disconnected from our people's history. That is American exceptionalism. And we have to reject it. We have to reject it because on it is grounded not only our ability to build socialism, but also to fight back the fascistic forces that are rising in the country and that will use this legacy to confuse our people.
Absolutely. I think that's a great... go ahead now.
I was just saying there's nothing left to say. Carlos said it all. I really want people to think about the question he asked us to reflect on. Why now? Why are people saying all of these things now? when no communist in the history of communism has said this? Why now? And think about that in concert with reproletarianization, with the American Marxism synthesizing as we speak. Why not?
Absolutely, brother. Well, thank you all for coming here. I hope you enjoyed the preparation of the stream. It was my first time preparing one. I felt very Eddie-like because I know Eddie goes through this deep process of preparing content, but I very much enjoyed it, and it seems like you guys did too. So I'm glad.
Yeah, you did an excellent job, and next time. I figured out you can import Google Slides into StreamYard, so maybe we'll try doing that and make it even cleaner. But yeah, you did a great job, and it's fun planning out the streams and picking what we react to, and drawing from the Discord. We have a Discord channel where you guys can share stuff with us, so join the Discord. But it was awesome, and I look forward to working together with you to put together some streams so we can get a meeting of the minds there. And of course with Noah as well. So look forward to our next stream.
Well, the meeting of the minds and something else.
All right, brothers. Well, we'll sign out to the International the same way we came in, with the anthem of the worldwide proletariat. Put your hand in your heart. And thank you all for joining us.
And economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.